The graveyard is cold and full of whispers. Green light hangs in the air, a fading echo of the spell that should have killed a boy. Marble angels stare down with blind stone eyes. The Triwizard Cup lies toppled on the damp grass. Harry is on his back, lungs burning, glasses askew, the taste of copper and smoke thick on his tongue. And in the cracked cauldron at the centre of Little Hangleton, something is rising. Bone-white fingers curl over the rim. Steam coils. The air tightens with a pressure that feels like a scream held between heartbeats. Harry can't look away as Voldemort pulls himself upright, skin slick, eyes red. The night everything changed, pressing in around them. Cedric is not dead. He lies a few yards away, sprawled against a tilted headstone, stunned where the green jet of light had missed him by inches and shattered the angel behind him instead. Stone dust coats his hair. His chest rises and falls in short, sharp bursts as the stunner wears off. His wand is still in his hand. Around them, robed figures apparate into being. Soft pops cut through the silence. Masks gleam. Death Eaters form a circle, their low chanting turning the graveyard into a ritual, into a war room. Harry's scar blazes. His fingers close around his own wand, slick with sweat. What if this is it? What if no one comes? What if this is where the story ends? Voldemort turns, newborn and ancient all at once, and Harry feels that gaze land on him like a curse. Terror claws up his spine. He wants to run. He can't move. Then Cedric groans. It's a tiny sound, a broken exhale, but it cuts through the grief like a knife. Harry's head snaps sideways. Cedric's eyes flutter open, unfocused, grey with shock. He stares at the ring of masked figures, at the inhuman thing by the cauldron, at Harry. Harry, his voice cracks. A question, a plea. Choices condense into a single heartbeat. In canon, he screams for a body. In this graveyard, on this night, he screams for a boy. Cedric, the cup, go! Harry's throat tears on the word. He jabs his wand toward the fallen trophy. Run! Spells answer him. Red and green light erupts from the circle as Death Eaters react, startled, eager. A curse scorches the grass by Cedric's hand. To freeze, to curl in on himself, to wait to freeze, to curl in on himself, to wait for someone older, stronger, less afraid. No one is coming. He pushes himself up, legs numb, breath ragged. Hufflepuff. Fair play, hard work, loyalty. They are meaningless words until you decide what you're willing to do for someone else's chance to live. Harry is still shouting, voice hoarse, spells bursting from his wand in wild, desperate arcs. A shield charm, a mist stunner, a beam of green that passes so close to Cedric's shoulder he feels the cold of it, the promise of being dead before he hits the ground. He runs. Gravestones blur past in grey and shadow. His lungs burn. His heart hammers. He doesn't look back at Voldemort's rising form, at Harry standing alone under that terrible gaze. He fixes on the cup, blue-tinged, gleaming where it fell, and chooses not to be a casualty, to be a witness. A spell clips his side, white-hot. He stumbles, bites down on a scream, tastes blood. Another curse whistles overhead, shattering a stone cross in front of him. Pebbles sting his face. For a heartbeat, he almost stops. Then he hears Harry again. Cedric! He throws himself forward. His shoulder slams into the Triwizard Cup. Cold metal bites into his palm as his fingers close around the handle. The world detonates into blue. The portkey yanks him away, spinning him out of the graveyard, out of the circle, out of the night. Everything changed for someone else. And Harry Potter is left alone in Little Hangleton with Voldemort fully risen. So what if the boy who was supposed to die walks out of that graveyard alive? How much of the Second Wizarding War can still unfold the same way? This is that story. What if the tragic accident stood up and spoke? The echoes of that graveyard haven't faded when we have to draw a line. Canon. And everything else. In the original timeline, Cedric Diggory dies in an instant. One green flash, one fallen body, and that's it. He never even raises his wand. Harry screams for help that doesn't come, drags Cedric's dead weight back to Hogwarts, and watches Cornelius Fudge stand over that body and call it a tragic accident in the maze, a misfire, a misjudged spell. Nothing to do with war. From that moment on, Harry is alone, the only teenage witness to Voldemort's return. The boy who stared into red eyes in a graveyard and came back, shaking, blooded, and disbelieved. The Ministry smears him in the Daily Prophet. Mad, attention-seeking, dangerous. His grief is weaponized against him until it cuts through the grief like a knife and leaves only anger. But what if the accident stood up and spoke? What if Cedric comes back breathing, chest-heaving, portkey spit out between his teeth as he collapses on the grass? What if Madame Pomfrey is already running, wand lit, hands steady, because this is not a body to cover with a sheet, but a boy to save? What if, when Fudge reaches for the easy lie, there is a second champion in that hospital wing who can say, very clearly, very calmly, "No, I saw him too." Harry is still traumatized. He still wakes to the echo of his parents' screams layered now with Cedric's. But he is no longer the only boy in the room with a story about Voldemort. Across from him lies a Hufflepuff prefect, Quidditch captain, and Triwizard champion whose word carries a different kind of weight. Cedric has no prophecy, no boy-who-lived legend. He has reputation, fair-minded, steady, respected across houses, the student younger years want to be, and professors trust with responsibility. Canon Harry walks into fifth year, isolated, unsupported, smeared in the press. In this story, he walks in with a peer at his side. A co-champion who remembers the circle of Death Eaters, the cold voice, the rebirth spell. When Umbridge calls Harry a liar, she has to call Cedric Diggory a liar too. When the Prophet runs headlines, they have to sideline not just one traumatized Gryffindor, but Hogwarts' golden Hufflepuff. Cedric becomes the counterweight. Gryffindor's reckless courage balanced by Hufflepuff's stubborn loyalty. Where Harry burns, Cedric endures. Where Harry wants to charge, Cedric wants to organize. His presence drags the spotlight across the house most people underestimate and forces adults to confront a question they'd rather avoid. If this boy, this emblem of everything wholesome about Hogwarts, says war is coming, how long can they pretend not to hear? 2 teenage heroes instead of 1. 2 wands raised in the Great Hall, offering the same terrible testimony. The Ministry can still try to bury the truth, but now the tragic accident is standing under the enchanted ceiling, ready to talk. So what changes when silence is no longer an option? The answer starts with Hogwarts itself. Rewinding to the maze, the 1 second that changes everything. It starts in the maze, not with a scream, not with a spell, but with a choice. Hedgerows tower over them, black against a starless sky. The air is thick with enchantments and the metallic tang of fear. Harry and Cedric stand a few feet from the Triwizard Cup, both of them bruised, robes torn, lungs burning from the sprint and the scroots and the blasted hedges. For one suspended heartbeat, there is only silence. "Take it," Harry says, chest heaving. "You helped me with the dragons. You saved me from the scroot. You take it. You deserve it." Cedric stares at him, muddy hair plastered to his forehead, eyes too clear for how close to dead they've both come. He's Hufflepuff to his bones. Prefect. Quidditch captain. The boy who waited for a rematch when Hufflepuff beat Gryffindor in the rain. Fairness isn't a slogan for him. It's the way his magic sits in his hand. "No," Cedric answers, and there's steel in it. "You told me about the dragons. You warned me about the maze. I'm not winning because you fall on your face at the end." A beat, a breath. We take it together. That's the only way this story makes sense. Harry hesitates. He's thinking about Sirius in the stands, Remus beside him, Hermione's white-knuckled grip on the rail. He's thinking about the way war has been creeping into their lives, how every adult he trusts says this tournament is a distraction from the night everything changed in Godric's Hollow. What if this is the last normal thing he ever does? Together, Harry agrees. His hand closes around one handle of the cup. Cedric's fingers curl around the other. The world yanks sideways. Cold wind, the stink of damp earth, the press of headstones. The cup dumps them into a graveyard, and Cedric's first thought is stupidly mundane. This isn't the winner's platform. His second thought is that something is very, very wrong. A hooded figure. A high, cold voice that cuts through the grief like a knife, even before Cedric understands why there should be grief at all. Harry's scar is blazing. Cedric can see it, an angry red lightning bolt, and Harry's wand is in his hand before Cedric has even processed the word. Voldemort. Kill the spare. The green light comes for him. Fast. Final. In canon, this is where the story ends for Cedric Diggory. But this is that story where 1 second shifts. Harry moves. He doesn't think. He doesn't plan. He slams into Cedric's shoulder, shoving him sideways. The killing curse misses his heart by inches, smashing into a tilted angel statue behind him. Stone explodes. Shards tear through Cedric's side. A storm of spells. Ropes snake around a storm of spells. Ropes snake around Harry. The cauldron bubbles. Cedric can only stare, half stunned, as a body rises from steam and bone and blood. The boy who might have been celebrating under enchanted fireworks is instead watching the Dark Lord return, powerless, every second branding itself into memory. In the space of a breath, the tournament is gone. The cup is a trap. Glory is a joke. Cedric's future narrows to one raw thought: survive. "Cedric!" Harry screams once the duel begins, voice ragged. "The cup! Get to the cup!" Cedric crawls. Every movement is fire in his ribs. Spells crack the air overhead. One curse scorches the ground inches from his hand. He reaches, fingers slipping in the wet grass, stretching toward the fallen portkey. His fingertips brush cold metal as another streak of green light tears past his face. And we cut away, holding on that touch, that almost, that impossible chance. Because what happens when a boy who was supposed to be a body in a graveyard walks back into Hogwarts instead? That answer begins the moment Cedric opens his eyes under the enchanted ceiling. June 24th, 1995. When Hogwarts sees a ghost. Breathe June 24th, 1995. Minutes after the third task. The night Hogwarts thought it was about to mourn a champion. At the centre, on a plinth, none of them. 100. At the centre, on a plinth none of them can see, the Triwizard Cup flares blue, too bright, too sudden, and vanishes. For a heartbeat there is only silence, the kind that falls before a sentence, before a spell. Dumbledore is already half risen from his golden chair, hand braced on the armrest, eyes locked on the empty space where the cup was. He is not expecting cheers. He is braced for a body, for the story he has been dreading since the tournament began. The air splits with a bang as the portkey returns. Blue light, screamed gasps. The cup slams into the grass in front of the stands, and two figures crash down with it. One sprawled, one on his knees. Both alive. Cedric Diggory is not dead. He is bleeding, shaking, clothes torn and smeared with graveyard dirt. His hands scrabble at the grass as if he still expects it to be stone. His wand is clenched so tightly his knuckles are white, his chest heaving in ragged, panicked breaths. Beside him, Harry is on his back, eyes wide, scar an angry, livid red. For a moment, no one moves. They just stared. Then the world slams back into motion. The stands erupt. Names are shouted. Someone screams. The Hufflepuff table, transported down to the pitch for the spectacle, explodes into sobbing cheers. Yellow and black banners whip in the wind as if the house itself is trying to reach him. Amos Diggory doesn't walk. He runs, stumbling down from the judge's platform, nearly falling on the last step. Mrs. Diggory is right behind him, face white, hand clamped over her mouth. They hit the grass together, dropping to their knees beside their son. "Cedric! Cedric!" Amos's voice breaks on the second shout. His hands hover, terrified to touch, desperate to touch. When Cedric's head jerks toward him, when those grey eyes actually focus, Amos lets out a sound that is not a word, not really. It is relief and grief and disbelief, all tangled together. Pattern interrupt. Breathe. We are not in a graveyard now. We are in a school, under banners and candles, under the eyes of hundreds of children who were ready to watch a tragedy become official. This is that story, the one where the script tears in half. Cho-Chang is already crying, both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming as she pushes through the knot of Ravenclaws. She had rehearsed how she would stand at his memorial. She had not rehearsed this. On the platform, Cornelius Fudge's face goes carefully blank. This was meant to be an accident in a maze, a clean narrative with no Dark Lord, no war, no choice except to move on. A dead boy is a tragedy. A living witness is a problem. Dumbledore reaches them first of the staff, robes billowing, eyes taking in everything at once. The way Cedric flinches from shadows only he can see. The way Harry keeps reaching for him. The way the cup hums faintly with spent magic. "Cedric," Dumbledore says, low, steady, as if tone alone can be a spell. "You are at Hogwarts. You are safe." Cedric's laugh is a broken thing. "Safe," he echoes, and the word cuts through the grief like a knife. Later they will move to the Great Hall, candles swaying above a sea of whispering faces. Cedric will stand, supported on one side by his father, on the other by Madame Pomfrey. He will stare up at the enchanted ceiling, at the storm clouds rolling over reflected stars, and he will make a choice. His first words back in the castle are not a sob, or a thank you, or a plea to forget. They are a warning. "He's back," Cedric Diggory says, voice hoarse but carrying to the farthest corner. "Voldemort's back. I saw him." And with that sentence, the war stops being a rumour and becomes a problem the Ministry cannot bury. Because what if the boy who was supposed to be a body refuses to be silent? 2 stories, 1 graveyard, Harry and Cedric's conflicting choices. For a heartbeat, the Great Hall is frozen. Then the room explodes. Students scream, benches scrape, teachers surge forward. The night everything changed is suddenly louder than any Quidditch final. Dumbledore moves first. His wand is in his hand before Fudge can even inhale to speak. A sharp gesture, a ringing crack, and the doors slam themselves shut. The noise shudders into a trapped, echoing silence. "Madame Pomfrey," he says, voice cutting through the grief like a knife, "the champions will come with us. Now." Harry blinks. Cedric sways. Fudge is already pushing through the crowd, Bagman at his shoulder, both of them staring at Cedric as if the dead have no right to talk. In the corridor, Dumbledore's pace is brutal. Hospital wing first, he doesn't separate them yet. He won't let them be isolated prey. Pomfrey fusses over burns and curse grazes while Fudge hovers at the foot of Cedric's bed, face pale, eyes calculating. Bagman keeps glancing at the doors as though reporters might burst through at any second. "Cornelius," Dumbledore says mildly, "you will have your questions. After mine. 2 chairs, 2 beds, 2 stories, 1 graveyard." Dumbledore sits between them, blue eyes fierce. "Tell me everything, from the moment you touched the cup." His tone is gentle, but there is a war already moving behind it, an urgency that makes Harry's throat close. Harry spills it all in a rush. The portkey, the cold, Wormtail, the spell that killed the old man, the blood and the cauldron and Voldemort rising, pale and terrible. His words trip over each other, raw and furious, each sentence a wound. "He's back," Harry repeats, voice shaking. "He's back. He's got his body. He—" Cedric's hands are clenched in the sheets. He forces himself to breathe, to remember, to choose. He speaks slower, precise. "We landed in a graveyard. Riddle grave. There were Death Eaters. Masks. I saw the mark on their arms when they rolled up their sleeves." He swallows. He used Harry's blood. The spell— The word tastes wrong now. "It worked." Fudge seizes on the gap. Now, boys. Dark magic can create terrible illusions. Trauma, confusion. What if what you saw was some elaborate trick? A deranged follower staging a performance? Bagman nods too quickly, desperate for this version of the story. Safety is right there. Cedric can feel it. Fudge is already offering it in his eyes. "You're our hero. Say it was confusion. Say it was an accident in the maze. You'll be the golden boy, not the boy who paints a target on his own back." He imagines his parents in their kitchen, the prophet on the table. Triwizard champion survives tragic mishap. No war, no Dark Lord. No one staring at him in the street and wondering when he'll end up dead. What if he took it? What if he let Harry stand alone with this impossible truth? Harry is staring at him now, green eyes pleading and furious and afraid. This is that story, the moment where a Hufflepuff decides what loyalty really means. Cedric straightens. His voice is still shaking, but the words are not. "It wasn't a trick," he says. "It was Voldemort. I saw him. I heard his followers answer him. Under Veritaserum, under any spell you want, I will say the same." The room seems to tilt. Fudge's expression hardens, all warmth dropping away. In that instant, Cedric understands. This choice will follow him for the rest of his life. And somewhere in Dumbledore's eyes, something like grim relief flickers. Because with that sentence, Harry Potter is no longer the only witness, and the Ministry's denial just became a far more dangerous game. The Ministry's nightmare. A Hufflepuff. They can't smear. The silence in Dumbledore's office stretches, tight as a drawn bow. Two boys, two matching stories. One minister who suddenly looks very, very small. Because Cornelius Fudge can call Harry Potter unstable, dramatic, damaged by war and grief. He can mutter about trauma, about wild tales and attention. But Cedric Diggory? Hufflepuff prefect. Quidditch captain. The boy McGonagall trusts with first years, and Madam Hooch trusts with the pitch. There is no file of detentions to waive, no history of rule-breaking to twist. Cedric's record is maddeningly clean. That's the Ministry's nightmare. Stares at Cedric as if sheer disbelief stares at Cedric, as if sheer disbelief might make the words retract themselves. What if he leans into that spotless reputation instead of fighting it? What if he smothers Cedric in praise, in medals, in meaningless titles, until the edges of his story blur? Exceptional bravery, Fudge could say. An Order of Merlin, a scholarship, a summer internship at the Ministry. Smiles for the Prophet's front page, all with one quiet condition. Be vague about the details. Emphasize confusion. A masked man. A strange spell. Let the phrase "you must have been disoriented, my boy" repeat until it wears grooves in Cedric's mind. And if that doesn't work, there are his parents. Amos and his wife in their tidy homes suddenly flooded with owls. Invitations, private meetings, subtle warnings about how dangerous it is to cross the Ministry in a time of fear. The implication that a dead boy is tragic, but a living boy who angers the wrong people. That's a different story, but every one of those choices is a risk because Hufflepuff loyalty cuts both ways. Cedric doesn't just have a reputation, he has a house. The shift at Hogwarts is immediate. The house that's usually dismissed as background noise suddenly has the second teenage hero of the war sitting at their table, shoulders rigid, hands shaking when he remembers the graveyard, the night everything changed. Hufflepuff benches fill with students who stare at him with fierce, protective pride. They were always loyal. Now they are loyal to a direct witness of Voldemort's return. Some Ravenclaws start running the numbers. 2 independent accounts. Identical details. A pattern that logic can't ignore. In Gryffindor, the reaction is visceral. If Cedric Diggory, the fair-minded rival who once asked for a match to be replayed because of Dementors, says, "Harry is right," then Harry is right. Full stop. Slytherin's response is quieter. A few purebloods snicker about Diggory drama in corners, but the sharper ones watch the Ministry's contortions with cold interest. Power that lies this blatantly is power that can be exploited. By October, the Daily Prophet can smear Harry all it wants, call him unstable, attention-seeking, even dangerous. But how do you discredit a boy whose entire identity is fairness, honesty, and loyalty? How do you claim hysteria when the calm, golden Hufflepuff who never caused trouble is saying the same dead man stood up in a graveyard and screamed? This is that story. The one where the underdog house stops being a joke and becomes a political problem. Where every move Fudge makes, to flatter, to pressure, to gaslight, only sharpens the contrast between a corrupt ministry and a boy who cannot quite bring himself to lie. And as Hogwarts tilts around that truth, another question begins to form in the shadows of the castle. If Hufflepuff has a hero now, what does that do to the war that's coming? Summer of silence. Can you bribe a Hufflepuff hero? Summer comes without mercy. No cheering stands, no golden cup, just a small house at the edge of Ottery St. Catchpole, where the Triwizard champion wakes up screaming at shadows only he can see. Cedric Diggory jerked upright in bed, heart pounding, hands scrabbling for a wand that wasn't under his pillow anymore. The graveyard was still there when he blinked. The marble angels, the cold mist. Voldemort's red eyes as the spell hit the air and Harry screamed his name. Then the room swam back into focus. Quidditch posters, neatly folded robes, the faint smell of Mrs. Diggory's chamomile tea drifting up the stairs. "Cedric?" Her voice outside the door. Hesitant. Every night the same. Nightmare again. He stared at his shaking hands. "I'm fine, Mum." A choice. Lie. To make her stop hovering. Tell the truth and watch that look in her eyes cut through the grief like a knife. Downstairs, Amos Diggory had rearranged the sitting room 3 times. The Daily Prophet lay open on the table, the headline about Triwizard Triumph already yellowing. They'd framed the photo of Cedric holding the cup, not the one of Cedric and Harry together. Safer that way. Cleaner. He told the story to his parents once. All of it. The Portkey, Wormtail, the Rebirth, the Death Eaters. Harry's voice shaking as he said Voldemort was back. Amos had listened, pride and horror warring in his face, knuckles white around his mug. Mrs. Diggory had just put a hand over her mouth and stared. After that, the house fell into a careful silence. No one said Voldemort. No one said war. The ministry came on a Tuesday. Not Fudge. Of course not. A polite knock, mid-morning, when Amos was home from work on leave, and Cedric was pretending to read through his new tea prep. The witch on the doorstep wore pink, carried a clipboard, and smiled with all her teeth. "Dolores Umbridge, Undersecretary to the Minister," she said, voice syrupy and controlled. "May I come in? Such a brave boy you have. What if the most dangerous spell in the world wasn't Avada Kedavra, but a compliment with a condition attached?" She made tea in their kitchen, commented on Mrs. Diggory's curtains, admired Amos's ministry service plaque. Then, gently, she got to the point. An Order of Merlin First Class. A fast-track position in the Department of Magical Games and Sports once Cedric finished Hogwarts. A scholarship fund for future training. "In return," she said, sliding a parchment across the table, "we simply hope you'll clarify a few confusing impressions from that dreadful night. The night everything changed, poor dear." Cedric read the draft. His name was there. Harry's. But Voldemort was a rumour now, a shadowy figure. The graveyard duel became a chaotic accident. The dead Muggle caretaker vanished altogether. His stomach turned. He didn't want to go back there. Not in his head. Not in words. Every time he spoke the truth, the smell of grave dirt came with it. Every time he saw his parents flinch, something in him screamed to shut up, to take the offer, to let the ministry handle it. Amos's eyes shone as he looked at the parchment. Recognition. Status. Safety. This is generous, he managed. But there was a hitch in his voice, a splinter of suspicion. Fudge had brushed him off at St. Mungo's. Now they were here with medals and money. Cedric saw it for the first time, how power moved. Not with open spells, but with quiet edits to a story. "Of course," Umbridge purred. "You remain free to make your own choice. We only want to avoid panic. Imagine the grief if people believed you-know-who had truly returned." Harry's face flashed in his mind. Dumbledore's. The rows of students in the Great Hall who had stared at him, waiting. If he lied now, what happened to them when the war came for real? His hand closed around the quill. The parchment waited. One signature, one altered sentence, and the official truth of the wizarding world would change. Cedric lowered the quill until the tip touched the line. Ink trembled. "And we cut away before you see what he writes." This is that story. Pattern break. Cedric's letter to Harry that never existed in canon. Not the graveyard. Not the ministry office. A desk. Cedric's desk at home, late June, the night everything changed for him in a quieter way. No crowds. No reporters. Just a single object in the lamplight. A sheet of parchment, half filled, the ink blotted where his hand had stalled over 3 awful words. "I should have died." The blot had spread, a dark bruise on the sentence. He stared at it until the shapes blurred. The screams, the green spell, the cold of the graveyard pressed in around him again. Harry shouting at him to take the cup. Wormtail's knife. Voldemort's voice, high and dead and real. What if he'd argued? What if he'd stayed? What if Harry had been the one who didn't make it back? Cedric's quill shook. He dragged in a breath, forced his mind away from the war that hadn't officially begun but was already living in his bones, and went back to the start of the letter. Potter. He crossed it out. Too formal. Too distant for someone who had watched Harry's back while the Dark Lord rose from a cauldron. Harry, I'm sorry, he wrote, the words cutting through the grief like a knife. I'm sorry I left you in that graveyard. You told me to take the cup. I ran. I've replayed it 1,000 times. I keep thinking I should have stayed. I should have died there and you should have gone home. The quill hovered again. He could hear Fudge's voice from 2 days ago, oily and insistent, instructing him to call it a dark spell gone wrong, an accident, something that didn't demand a war. Cedric's jaw clenched. He bent back to the parchment. Thank you for saving my life. I know you'll say you didn't, that you just shouted and I just ran, but if you hadn't, I'd be dead. I remember everything. I believe you. Voldemort is back. There, the word on the page. No euphemisms. No softened account. I need you to know, he went on, the Ministry asked me to change what I told Dumbledore, to clarify that I didn't actually see him, only shadows and masks. I said no. If they push harder, I'm not backing down. If I have to stand in the Great Hall and say his name in front of everyone, I will. He didn't write that they'd hinted about his father's job, about aura applications, about how cooperation could make things easier. That was his choice to carry. I won't let them twist what happened. You're not alone in this. Not this time. He signed it, Cedric, and tied the parchment to his owl's leg with fingers that finally felt steady. Hours later, at Privet Drive, the pattern of Harry's summer was broken by a sharp tap on the window. Not Hedwig. A different owl, brown and impatient, feathers ruffled by muggle air. Harry opened the window, heart already racing. No one wrote to him here without a reason. The envelope had his name in a neat, careful hand. The Diggory seal. He read it standing by his narrow bed, the street lamp outside throwing weak orange light across the page. Each sentence landed with the weight of a spell. Someone believed him. Not Dumbledore, distant and powerful. Not Sirius and Remus, who loved him but were adults, already soldiers in a war. Someone his own age. Someone who had been there, who had stared at the same circle of gravestones and lived. The relief hit so hard his knees nearly gave. He wasn't screaming into the void alone this time. He wasn't just the boy who saw what no one wanted to see. He folded the letter carefully, fingers tracing the ink-blotted line, and crossed the room. The loose floorboard under the bed creaked under his hand. For a moment he hesitated, then slid the parchment into the dark space beside his wand and the photograph of his parents. In canon, Harry hid only memories there. In this story, he hides proof. Proof that somewhere out there another boy was marked by Voldemort and had chosen not to look away. This is that story. Back to Hogwarts. 2 witnesses walk into the Great Hall. The train is already moving when it hits Harry. Not the lurch of the Hogwarts Express, but the sight of yellow and black through the glass of a corridor door. Cedric Diggory, taller, thinner, the easy smile gone. For a second, Harry thinks he's seeing the dead. Then Cedric turns, really turns, and their eyes lock. What if the boy who should have been a name on a plaque is instead standing in a cramped train corridor, breathing the same air? The noise of students, of trunks scraping and owls hooting drops into a strange, thick silence. Harry's scar doesn't burn, something deeper does. Cedric's prefect badge catches the light. Harry stares at the small gleam of metal, remembering a graveyard circle of masks and a high, cold voice that cut through the grief like a knife. Cedric remembers too. It's there in the way his hand tightens on his wand, in the way he scans the corridor as if Death Eaters might be hiding behind second-year Hufflepuffs. "Potter," he says, and his voice is rougher, older. "We made it back." Harry's answer is almost nothing. A nod. A quiet, "Yeah." But in that heartbeat, in that corridor, 2 witnesses stand facing each other, both marked by the same spell. The same night everything changed. No one else on this train knows what it felt like when Voldemort rose. They do. By the time they reach Hogwarts, the story has already outrun them. The Great Hall is a storm barely held in stone. Candles float, plates gleam, but the real electricity is in the way hundreds of students turn as one. Whispers follow Harry to the Gryffindor table, as they always do, but tonight they fork, split, race across the hall toward Hufflepuff. Cedric sits down and the room tilts. Some faces are awed, staring at him as if he came back from the dead. Some are skeptical, eyes narrowed, already repeating their parents' doubts. A few are resentful. He was already Quidditch captain, already a champion. Now he is something worse in their minds, a rival hero. Up at the staff table, Fudge's framed decrees hang on the wall behind the teachers, parchment shadows of a ministry that screamed for control. Educational decree this, educational decree that. Umbridge sits in her pink, smiling, a sugar-crusted threat. Dumbledore rises. The hall falls into instant silence. "My dear students," he begins, voice calm, eyes anything but. "Before we feast, I must acknowledge that this summer follows difficult events in June." No name, no Voldemort, just that careful word, events, as if a resurrection and a war reborn could be folded into a single line of a speech. Harry feels the choice in that omission. Cedric does too. Across the hall their eyes meet. Two witnesses, one headmaster, a ministry watching. House lines begin to blur in the spaces no adult is looking. Hufflepuffs slide closer to the Gryffindors on the benches, trading glances, quiet nods. A fifth year with a badger on his robes leans in to mutter to a Weasley twin. A third-year Gryffindor shifts so she can hear what the Hufflepuff prefects are saying about security. Without planning it, Cedric and Harry become twin poles in the room, gravity wells around which a different kind of Hogwarts starts to form. Then Dumbledore sits, and the pattern breaks. Umbridge stands, coughs her little fake cough, and begins to speak. The words are syrup and poison, all about order, safety, tradition. She talks about harmony while the decrees behind her promise surveillance. She talks about progress while erasing the night everything changed. They're going to pretend nothing happened, Cedric thinks, jaw clenched. At the Gryffindor table, Harry comes to the same dead-cold conclusion. When Umbridge finally smiles her last smile, the Great Hall erupts in forced applause. Over the noise, Harry and Cedric find each other's gaze one more time. No words, just a look that says, "This is that story. The ministry will lie. Hogwarts will feel the war first. So what do we do now?" Umbridge versus the Hufflepuff. Golden Boy. The first defense against the dark arts lesson with Umbridge feels wrong before she even speaks. The classroom is too neat, too bright, the blackboard already filled with tidy, suffocating lines of ministry-approved objectives. Harry stares at the pink cardigan. Cedric stares at the stack of parchment handouts. Around them, the low buzz of expectation dies into a thin, nervous silence. Umbridge's voice is sugar over poison. "Wands away. You will not require them in this class." She talks about a theoretical understanding, about there is no need to frighten yourselves with spells, about how certain rumours of you-know-who's return are the result of attention-seeking behaviour. She never says Harry's name. She doesn't have to. Every student can feel where the spell of her words is aimed. What if she had walked into a room with only one boy who'd seen Voldemort rise? In canon, she did. In this story, there are two. Cedric lifts his hand. Not fast, not defiant, just a prefect asking a question. "Yes, Mr. Diggory." Her smile tightens a fraction at the recognition. Hufflepuff Golden Boy. Triwizard champion. The one Fudge paraded, then tried to forget. "Professor," Cedric says, voice calm, "Ministry Decree 24 states that in times of increased dark activity, Hogwarts is to maintain, not reduce, practical defensive training. Has that policy changed?" He doesn't look at Harry. He looks straight at her, steady, the way he stared down a dragon. A few Ravenclaws glance up from their books, quills pausing. Hufflepuffs lean forward. These are his people. They know he doesn't pick fights. If Cedric is asking, something is wrong. Umbridge's eyes flicker. "There is no increased dark activity," she says. "The unfortunate incident at the tournament." "In the graveyard," Cedric answers, still respectful, still razor-precise. "Where I saw Voldemort with my own eyes, where he cast the Cruciatus on me, where he duelled Harry." The words cut through the grief like a knife. The room flinches. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't grandstand. He just tells the truth. Harry can feel his heart pounding, the old war of choices roaring back. Speak and be branded mad. Stay silent and let the lie harden. But Cedric is already standing in that space, taking the weight. "Mr. Diggory," Umbridge says, and the sweetness is gone now. "The Ministry has ruled that the events of that night are inconclusive." "So the policy has changed," Cedric replies, "because if the Ministry believes we are safe, it is overriding its own emergency protocol." "Could you clarify that for us, Professor?" "For the record." For the record, the words land with Ravenclaw precision and Hufflepuff stubbornness. A few students who doubted Harry, who'd whispered that trauma could twist memory, stare at Cedric instead. Cedric, who limps slightly when he forgets to hide it. Cedric, whose hands still sometimes tremble when the night everything changed, slips into his dreams. If he is this certain, how dead can the threat really be? A slow, dangerous murmur ripples through the class. What if the Ministry is wrong? What if both boys are telling the truth? Umbridge feels it. Control, slipping, narrative, fraying. She forces a laugh that doesn't reach her eyes. "There will be no more discussion of these fantasies. 5 points from Hufflepuff for fear-mongering." The room freezes. Hufflepuff stare at her, then at Cedric. No one moves. No one turns on him. Loyalty holds. "Understood, Professor," Cedric says quietly. He sits, but the damage is done. Not to him. To her. By the end of the week, whispers trail him down corridors. Not scandal. Certainty. He said Voldemort is back. He didn't scream. He didn't rant. He just stated it like a fact in a textbook. Umbridge watches it spread. Watches her pink, padded authority erode faster than it should. In the next lesson, when the bell finally rings, Cedric is first to the door. Harry follows a few steps behind. Neither speaks. Umbridge's eyes linger on Cedric's back as he leaves, her hand moving delicately over her clipboard. Next to his name, she writes 2 neat words. "Monitor closely." One more threat added to her private war, and tomorrow she will make her first move. 2 leaders, 1 army, rebuilding the DA with Cedric at Harry's side. Umbridge makes her move the next weekend. The pub is dim, cramped, and humming with low voices. The Hogshead, smoke in the air, stale ale on the floor, the distant bleat of a goat. Harry stands in the corner with Hermione and Ron, watching students trickle in, counting faces, counting houses. Gryffindor red, a splash of Ravenclaw blue, a few nervous Hufflepuffs who keep glancing at the door as if they're waiting for permission to stay. Then the door opens and the room changes. Cedric Diggory steps inside, Hufflepuff scarf loose around his neck, Quidditch captain's posture straight and unshaken. The whispers spike. A few first years actually stared, because this is the boy who was supposed to be dead. The boy who went to a graveyard with Harry Potter and came back with a curse burn across his ribs and a story the Ministry keeps trying to smother. Behind him, more Hufflepuffs file in. Ernie, Hannah, Susan, 2 Ravenclaw chasers from their last match. They don't cluster around Harry, they gravitate to Cedric, then look over at Harry as if measuring him against the rumour and the Prophet ink. What if this is the moment the school decides who to believe? Hermione lays out the idea first, voice steady, eyes scanning the crowd. A group to learn real defensive magic, to fight back against a Ministry that is pretending there is no war. Harry feels the old weight settle on his shoulders as they push him forward. He talks about Dementors, about Patronuses, about spells that kept him alive when he should have been dead. Then Cedric speaks. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. "Harry isn't mad," he says, and the silence cuts through the grief like a knife. He walks them through the graveyard with a prefect's precision. The cold stone, the circle of masked faces, the way Voldemort's wand moved when he cast the Cruciatus on Harry. He fills in angles Harry never saw, the Death Eaters at Harry's back, the spells that missed by inches. 2 boys, 2 wands, one night everything changed. It stops being a trauma rant. It becomes testimony. When they ask who will lead, the answer feels obvious and impossible at the same time. Harry shakes his head first. Cedric does the same a heartbeat later. Cedric brings discipline, fairness, the Patronus no textbook can teach. Cedric brings discipline, fairness, the calm authority of someone who has captained a team through storms and finals and fear. Gryffindor instinct. Hufflepuff steadiness. One choice, Joint command. The room of requirement answers that choice. Under Cedric, the DA starts to feel less like a secret club and more like a Quidditch training camp thrown into a war. There's a board on the wall with rotating practice schedules. Mixed house pairings for every drill. Hufflepuffs with Slytherins who slipped in under the radar. Ravenclaws trading spell theory with Gryffindors who rely on reflex. They run laps before wand work. Stamina, Cedric insists. You can't cast if you can't breathe. Shields first, then jinxes, then controlled chaos where Harry prowls the edges, hurling surprise curses to force improvisation. Cedric blows a whistle, actually blows a whistle when someone drops their guard. Pattern interrupt. The DA starts to cheer when someone pulls off a perfect protego the way they would for a Wronski feint. They groan at missed disarms. They track progress on a chart, not because it's a game, but because it feels like a team refusing to die quietly. Outside, the politics are poison. Inside, under the shifting ceiling and candlelit banners, there is movement, sweat, shouted spells, and something dangerously close to hope. This is that story. An Umbridge. Push them from training into open, push them from training into open rebellion. Cho, Cedric, and the triangle that changes sides. Cho Chang notices it first in the way the Great Hall goes quiet when Cedric walks in. Not dead. Not a photograph on the memorial table. Alive, shoulders tight, eyes that have seen the night everything changed and can't unsee it. In canon, her 5th year is defined by absence. Cedric gone, Harry haunted, grief that the Ministry tries to fold into a neat, tragic accident. She's drawn to Harry because he is the only other person who stared into that darkness, and it pulls them together and tears them apart in the same breath. Up screaming. He flinches when wands are up screaming. He flinches when wands are raised too fast. When he says Voldemort is back, his voice shakes, but the words cut through the grief like a knife. Cho stands beside him in the hospital wing, holding his hand when he tells Dumbledore everything. The graveyard, the circle of Death Eaters, the way Harry screamed for him to run. This is that story, the one where she doesn't have to imagine his last moments because he can't stop reliving them. By autumn, Cedric is a symbol, Hufflepuff's champion who came back from the dead in all but name. Harry is the Ministry's problem. Cedric is the one they're desperate to control. Fudge wants him quiet. Umbridge wants him useful. Cho wants him whole. That's the first fracture, because Harry's answer to control is resistance, and resistance has a name now, Dumbledore's army. She doesn't join the DA to chase a crush. She joins because she watched Cedric's hands shake when he tried to hold his wand steady, and she refuses to be that helpless when the war comes for her. So there she is, in the room of requirement, heart beating too fast as Harry demonstrates a shield charm, and she can feel Cedric's absence like a pressure at her back. She is loyal to the boy she walks back to the Hufflepuff table. She is drawn to the boy who turns fear into training, and training into hope. Cedric hates it. Not Harry. Not Cho. He hates that Cho is now a target because she believes him, because she stands up in Ravenclaw Tower and says, clear and steady, that the graveyard was real. Guilt sits on him heavier than the Hufflepuff badge on his chest. If she gets hurt, it will be because she trusted his story. Umbridge smells that tension. She schedules Cedric for private check-ins, smiles too sweetly at Cho in the corridor, drops poisonous questions. Isn't Harry reckless? Isn't Dumbledore unstable? Wouldn't it be safer if Cedric distanced himself? Every word is a spell aimed at the cracks between them. Harry feels it too. The awkwardness when Cedric appears at the room's door one night watching Cho practice a stunning spell. The silence before Harry nods and says, "We could use another captain." The choice to treat Cedric as an ally instead of a rival. The real shift comes in the Ravenclaw common room. The fire is low. The sky beyond the windows is ink black. A 5th-year boy repeats a Daily Prophet headline and sneers that Harry is making it up for attention. Cho stands. Her chair scrapes stone. Her voice doesn't shake. Cedric Diggory was there, she says. He saw Voldemort rise. He saw the Death Eaters. If Cedric says Voldemort's back, he's back. The room falls into a hard, stunned silence. In that moment, Cho isn't caught between two boys. She's the bridge that makes their alliance undeniable. And the next time Umbridge moves against Harry, she'll find Ravenclaw isn't neutral anymore. The Daily Prophet's dilemma. Smear one boy or two. The chamber is open and full of whispers again. Only now the chamber is the entire country and the whispers are headlines. The Daily Prophet has a problem. They know the script they're supposed to run. Harry Potter, unstable. Harry Potter, attention-seeking. Harry Potter, the boy who screamed about you-know-who in a graveyard no one can verify. Rita Skeeter has already sharpened her quick quotes quill for it, tasting the war of words the way other people taste blood. What if the famous boy who lived can't tell the difference between nightmares and reality? One draft headline purrs. What if Hogwarts is no longer safe under an aging headmaster and his pet celebrity? It worked in another story. An owl wing with a bandage around his ribs and a wing with a bandage around his ribs and a curse scar that still burns when he sleeps. He stares at the ceiling when the prophet arrives each morning, pages rustling, students flinching at every new smear against Harry. The articles cut through the grief like a knife, turning pain into spectacle. The prophet's editors hit a wall. Harry they can paint as erratic. He has a temper, a history of breaking rules, a godfather who escaped Azkaban and then was cleared in a blaze of scandal. But Cedric? Cedric is prefect, Quidditch captain, Hufflepuff golden boy. Teachers respect him. Parents know his name. Little kids wear badges with his number. Smearing him outright is dangerous, too obvious, too cruel, so they make a choice. They pivot. Brave but confused, Diggory led astray, the new headline screams. The article praises Cedric's unquestioned courage and stalwart Hufflepuff loyalty, then carefully suggests that such a loyal boy could be misled, that he might have been caught in Dumbledore's web of influence, that Harry Potter, unstable and dramatic, may have coloured Cedric's memories with wild tales of resurrection and forbidden spells. They don't call Cedric a liar, they call him a victim, and they set him opposite Harry without ever printing the word enemy. At breakfast, Cedric reads the piece once, then again. His hands shake. Around him, Hufflepuff watches in taut silence as the prophet turns their champion into a prop. Confused? He says finally, voice low. They weren't there. This is that story. The night everything changed for Cedric Diggory is not the graveyard. It's this morning, ink still wet, when he realizes the war isn't just wands and Death Eaters. It's narrative. It's who gets believed. So he makes another choice. He refuses every prophet request. He sends back Rita's owl with a single clipped line. You misquoted my friends, you won't misquote me. Instead, through Dumbledore, he offers a controlled, on-the-record interview to a smaller, neutral paper and to the wireless. He gives dates, names, spells. He describes the circle of Death Eaters, the feel of Voldemort's magic, the way the air itself screamed. Harry's account and Cedric's lineup detail for detail. 2 boys, 2 houses, 1 story. So what happens when the wizarding public can't dismiss it as one unstable teenager anymore? Do they cling to Fudge's denial until the dead start piling up? Or does the facade fracture months, even years, earlier than in the world you remember? Inside the Order, Dumbledore's new piece on the board. The chamber is open and full of whispers again, but this time it isn't a school corridor. It's the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, choked with steam and candle smoke, the air heavy with fear, and the word Voldemort. Dumbledore stands at the head of the table, Harry on one side, Cedric on the other. 2 boys, 2 houses, 1 story, and an Order of the Phoenix that can no longer pretend this is a question of belief. Both of them saw him return, Dumbledore says, and his voice cuts through the grief like a knife. Both of them escaped the same graveyard. Their accounts match in every particular that matters. The Ministry will find this inconvenient. Moody snorts, scarred face twisting. Inconvenient? Fudge can call Potter unstable all he wants. Harder to smear Diggory, prefect, Quidditch captain, Hufflepuff golden boy. You've just had your cover story blown to pieces, Albus. Use it. This is where the war shifts. Because what if the Ministry's smear campaign hits a wall made of Hufflepuff credibility and Diggory loyalty? What if the boy Fudge wanted to mourn as a tragic accident is standing in front of him, wand hand still shaking, describing the exact spell Voldemort used to rise from the cauldron? Tonks leans forward, pink hair dim in the low light. He's already a target. You know who saw him. His Death Eaters saw him. Keeping him ignorant won't keep him safe. Train him. Bring him in. Give him choices before someone else does. Across the table, Molly Weasley's hands are clenched in a dish towel. "He's just a boy," she says, staring at Cedric's pale face. Harry, too. They should be at home, not in... this. You can't build an army out of children, Albus. Silence. Then the scrape of a chair as Sirius shifts, jaw tight, remembering the night everything changed for him in Godric's Hollow, remembering another boy left in a war he didn't start. Dumbledore listens, but his eyes are on Cedric. In his mind, the calculus is brutal. Harry is the prophecy's focus, the child the Dark Lord marked. Cedric is something else, a symbol. Proof that Hufflepuff's quiet strength can be called to the front lines. Proof that fairness and hard work and stubborn loyalty can stand in open defiance of both Voldemort and a corrupt ministry. But he also remembers a body in the hospital wing, cold and still in another timeline. Remembers parents screaming. Remembers grief you can taste. He will not throw another teenager at the dark without thinking. So he makes a different choice. The Order does not give Cedric a seat at the table. Not yet. Instead, they reach out to the Diggorys, quietly, carefully. Arthur Weasley visiting Amos for a departmental follow-up. Hestia Jones walking the hedgerows near Ottery St. Catchpole under disillusionment while Cedric flies. Wards strengthened on the Diggory home, protective spells layered until the house hums. Information flows one way at first. Dumbledore's people slip them truth the prophet won't print. Names to watch, safe houses to trust. The Diggorys in turn talk to cousins, to old Hufflepuff friends, to colleagues in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. A semi-order aligned circle begins to form, quiet resistance rooted in the house everyone underestimated. Hufflepuff starts to wake up, and one evening, in the quiet after another Order meeting, Dumbledore sits alone in his office, Fawkes staring down at him. The choice has crystallized. He cannot keep Cedric entirely outside the war. The war has already found him. He picks up a heavy sheet of parchment. The letter is short, careful, an invitation more than an order, a conversation about truth, about power, about the future of their world. When the wax seal cools, a single phoenix feather is pressed into it, shimmering faintly. Miles away, Cedric Diggory hears the soft rush of wings at his window. He reaches for the envelope and wonders, just for a heartbeat, whether opening it will mean that the boy who came back from the dead will never again be allowed to pretend this is someone else's story. Training a Hufflepuff champion for war. Cedric opens it, not in the Great Hall, not in front of his parents. In his bedroom, door shut, the silence so complete he can still hear the graveyard if he lets himself. The green light, the way his own name almost became a headstone. War doesn't scream here. It waits. The letter is from Dumbledore, but the handwriting at the bottom, cramped and hurried, is Tonks's. 2 nights later, Cedric slips through the castle under a disillusionment charm that isn't his. The Hufflepuff prefect who never broke curfew is now counting patrol routes, timing Filch's limp, listening for the soft rush of a phoenix that marked the night everything changed. They meet in an empty classroom near the greenhouses. Tonks is leaning against a desk, hair Hufflepuff yellow and black, wand twirling between her fingers. Lupin stands beside the window, pale in the moonlight, tired in a way Cedric recognizes from his own mirror. "Right," Tonks says. "You're the boy who came back from the dead. Let's make sure you don't go back." Training does not look heroic. It looks methodical. Shield charms until his arm shakes. Stunning spells from 3 angles at once. Lupin murmuring. "Where's your nearest exit? Where's cover? Who's the first non-combatant you move?" Until Cedric can answer before the question is finished. Harry learned by almost dying in a graveyard. Cedric is being taught how not to. What if that difference changes everything? He brings Quidditch discipline to it. Short drills, clear goals, rotations. He thinks in formations, in how you protect your seeker, in how you cover blind spots on a pitch where the bludgers now fire killing curses. When Lupin explains aura room clearing tactics, Cedric is already translating them into corridors and common rooms and a great hall full of children. This is that story, the narrator might say, where the Hufflepuff prefect becomes a quiet tactician. In the DA, it shows. Harry still leads the charge, wand flashing, Instinctive, brilliant, reckless. But beside him, Cedric is the one who calls, "Shields up, line 2 forward." And suddenly there's a staggered wall of Protagos instead of a scattered mess of sparks. He has them practice silent casting until their throats ache from not speaking, until spells leap from wands on thought alone. Pattern interrupt. He halts a session and says, "Wands down." They stare at him, confused, breathing hard. "Pick 3 people," Cedric says. "They're the ones who can't fight. Your job is not to win. Your job is to get them out alive." The room changes. Spells become cover fire. Bodies shift to shield others. They trip over each other, argue, fail. He makes them run it again and again. Grief for what almost happened in that graveyard sits behind every correction. Harry improvises in chaos. Cedric is learning to shape it. Under Tonks's eye, he practices falling without losing his wand. Under Lupin's, he learns to duel in near darkness, to feel the air move before a spell hits. They talk about choice, when to stand, when to run, when to drag someone with you even if they're screaming. He walks back to Hufflepuff nights later, robes damp with sweat, mind buzzing with escape routes and shield angles, and wonders, when war finally comes through these walls, will Hogwarts be ready for the boy who refused to stay dead, to have planned for it? Because the next lesson won't be in an empty classroom. It'll be in a corridor filled with smoke. Hufflepuff House. Wakes up from underestimated to unignorable. The corridor filled with smoke is still in Cedric's head when the Hufflepuff common room door swings open and he steps through. Warm light, low ceilings. They look up from essays and chessboards. And quietly whispered gossip. First years stare at the faint white line along Cedric's jaw where a graveyard spell grazed him. A second year drops a chocolate frog. The card flutters under a chair in the sudden silence. "Cedric," Ernie Macmillan says, standing so fast his chair scrapes. "Has the Ministry said anything?" He tries to sound pompous, controlled. His voice shakes instead. This is that story. 2 weeks ago, these same students were arguing about Quidditch fouls and whether Snape was actually dead inside. Now they're passing around copies of The Prophet, fingers smudged with ink, circling phrases like tragic misunderstanding and unsubstantiated claims, and dissecting them the way Hermione dissects a spell. What if they sack Madam Bones for backing Dumbledore? A 6th year whispers, eyes flicking to Susan. What happens to auras then? Susan Bones feels every gaze. Her aunt's name is suddenly a battlefield. She sits straighter, cheeks pale, and asks Cedric very calmly, "Did Aunt Amelia get your statement? All of it?" "All." He nods. He remembers Amelia Bones's cool, precise questions, the way her quill never hesitated when he said Voldemort. "She believes us," he says. "She's fighting it." That word, fighting. It lands in Hufflepuff like a thrown stone. Hannah Abbott, who used to flinch from any raised voice, is now the one quietly counting wands, parchment, people. She corners Cedric by the fireplace, fingers twisting in her sleeve. "If Harry's organising something," she says, not quite naming the DA yet, "tell him we're in. Some of us at least. We can't just sit here and hope this all goes away." Not everyone agrees. A 5th-year boy near the barrel entrance mutters, "We're not Gryffindors. We keep our heads down. We live." His friend snaps back, "Tell that to Cedric. He went there and came back. You want him to shut up so you can feel safe?" The argument spreads in low, urgent voices. Safety versus truth. Comfort versus choice. Some Hufflepuffs stare at the fire, wishing desperately for the days when their biggest fear was Sprout's exam. Others are already drafting questions for Cedric about shield charms and ministry procedure, their grief for the boy who was supposed to be dead curdling into something harder. Outside, Slytherins still sneer about the House of Leftovers. But the joke doesn't land as cleanly now. Not when Hufflepuff produced the boy the Ministry couldn't silence, the champion who walked out of the night, everything changed and refused to let the story be rewritten. They start to notice it in the corridors. A Ravenclaw prefect asking Ernie for his read on Fudge's latest decree. A Gryffindor quietly pairing with a Hufflepuff in die practice because they listen, they don't panic. Even a few Slytherins watching Cedric with wary, calculating eyes, reassessing the house they once dismissed as harmless. In the common room, under the round windows and the soft hum of the kitchens below, Hufflepuff is waking up. To politics, to power, to the knowledge that neutrality is a spell that only works until someone decides to break it, when they finally stop being underestimated and start being unignorable, when they throw their weight behind Harry's resistance instead of staying at the edge of the fire. Which house becomes the true backbone of the student war? And if Hufflepuff stands firm, what breaks differently when the real battle reaches Hogwarts' doors? Ministry escalation. When buying silence fails. The chamber is open and full of whispers, not the chamber of secrets. The cramped sitting room of the Diggory cottage, where a fourth random inspection in 10 days has just ended with parchment dust on the carpet and a smashed photograph of Cedric on his first broom. The auras leave in brittle silence. Amos stands in the doorway, fists clenched, watching them disapparate with Ministry crisp pops that sound too much like spells. What if the Ministry can't buy your silence and decides to crush you instead? It starts soft, a memo misfiled, so Amos is called in and quietly reminded that Department of Magical Transportation posts are competitive. A supervisor who stares too long at Cedric's name and murmurs, "Shame if your boy's prospects got complicated by politics." A new form asking Cedric to clarify whether he might have been confounded in the graveyard. Each word is polite. Each choice is a threat. Then it hardens. 2 hit wizards at the door on Sunday morning, wands politely sheathed, but hands resting near them. Routine security review, Mr. Diggory. You understand, after the incident. They go through Cedric's school trunk, his Quidditch gear, even the drawer where he keeps old chocolate frog cards. One of them pauses over his notes about the graveyard, reads the word Voldemort, and his mouth tightens. Dangerous thing to write down, he says. He doesn't have to raise his voice. It still cuts through the grief like a knife. That night, Amelia Bones catches Cedric in a side corridor outside a Wizengamot antechamber. No entourage, no parchment, just her monocle glinting, her expression grave. "You're on a watch list," she says without preamble. Unofficial, naturally. Fudge is treating you as a political actor now, not a child who survived a spell that should have left you dead. He will not forgive you for contradicting him. Cedric's throat goes dry. "So I'm supposed to stop telling the truth?" Her stare is steady. "I am telling you to be careful and to document everything. People disappear in this kind of war, Mr. Diggory. Paper doesn't." At home, the strain is a constant third presence at the dinner table. Amos pushes peas around his plate, jaw working. Mrs. Diggory asks about homework, about Quidditch, about anything but the word Voldemort. The silence between questions screams. "You could soften it," Amos bursts out one evening. "Say you're not sure. Say it was dark, that maybe you missaw. They'd stop coming. They'd leave us alone." Cedric stares at his father, guilt twisting under his ribs. This is that story, the one where a Hufflepuff has to choose between safety and truth. "If I lie," he says quietly, "then he really did win that night. The night everything changed. I won't hand him that." So he doubles down. Every inspection, every veiled comment, every unsigned memo that appears on Amos's desk, Cedric writes it all in a meticulous hand in a leather-bound journal. Dates, names, exact phrases. He makes copies with duplicating charms and, the next time he's at Hogwarts, presses one thin stack of parchment into Dumbledore's hands. "If anything happens to me or my parents," Cedric says, voice shaking but unbroken, "I want this read to the entire Wizengamot, and to the Prophet if they'll print it." Dumbledore's eyes are tired, proud, afraid. "You understand this makes you a symbol, Cedric. The Ministry will treat you as such." "Then they should stop underestimating Hufflepuffs," Cedric answers. "I won't recant." The next blow doesn't come at their door. It arrives in the Great Hall. Owls pour in at breakfast, but one squat, toad-sealed envelope lands with a thud in front of Professor McGonagall. Pink parchment. Dolores Umbridge's looping hand. A new educational decree signed by Cornelius Fudge and his freshly appointed High Inquisitor, banning unauthorized student organizations, gatherings and associations formed for political or defensive purposes. In Umbridge's office, away from the candles and the chatter, there's a second copy. On that one, a single name is underlined twice in wet, glistening ink. Cedric Diggory. What happens when the Ministry decides the next battlefield isn't the Wizengamot, but the student corridors of Hogwarts itself? Prophecy, pressure, and the boy who wasn't chosen. Cedric's name is still wet on Umbridge's parchment when Dumbledore makes a different choice. Not a decree, not a speech, a conversation. He sends for Cedric after curfew. The castle is dark, the war not yet officially named, but the air in the stone corridors already tastes like it. Cedric climbs the moving staircase with his prefect's badge pinned straight and his heart hammering far too fast for a boy who is supposedly safe. The night everything changed once already. He was in a graveyard. Now it's an office. Dumbledore doesn't start with comfort. He starts with truth. "There is a prophecy," he says, and the word hangs between them like a suspended spell. Cedric stares at the silver instruments, at Fawkes's slow, watchful blinking, at the man who suddenly looks very old. It concerns Harry and Voldemort. Only them. Cedric's breath stutters. Not me. The thought cuts through the grief like a knife. He is not the boy fated to kill or be killed. He is not the one whose scar screamed in that graveyard. Relief floods him so hard his knees almost give. But Dumbledore keeps speaking. "Prophecies," he says softly, "name very few people. Wars involve many. Fate has, narrowed the final duel. It has not written the rest of the story. What if that is the worst part? Not being chosen. Being necessary anyway." Cedric hears the bones of it. Harry and Voldemort are locked on a collision course, neither can escape. Cedric's survival doesn't change who must stand in that last, terrible circle of wands, but it changes everything around it. Who believes Harry? Who joins the fight? Who lives long enough for the prophecy to matter at all? "So I'm—" "What?" Cedric manages. "Collateral? A witness?" Dumbledore's gaze is sharp now. No twinkle. No escape. "You're a choice," he says. "You're proof the Ministry cannot easily discredit. A Hufflepuff champion. A boy who touched the same portkey, saw the same rebirth, and returned alive when you were meant to be dead. You can save lives, Mr. Diggory. You can shift public opinion. You can buy Harry time. Time, in a war that might be worth more than any spell." Relief curdles into frustration. Cedric is important but not central, crucial but not chosen. He thinks of Harry's scar, of Sirius's hand on Harry's shoulder in the hospital wing, of Hermione's fierce, shaking voice when she argued with Fudge. He thinks of his father, already drafting letters to the Prophet, the Ministry, anyone who will listen. He could walk away. Let the Prophecy Boys handle the destiny part while he retreats to Quidditch practices and New Year revision and pretending the graveyard was just a nightmare. What if he did? The thought sickens him. "I won't be your symbol," Cedric says quietly. "Not if symbol means standing still." Dumbledore inclines his head. "Then what will you be?" Cedric answers without quite knowing when he decided. "A shield. And an echo." He swallows. "I'll stand in front of people who can't stand for themselves. And when Harry speaks, I'll say, yes, I was there, he's telling the truth." As many times as it takes. Hufflepuff loyalty, weaponized. Fairness, turned into strategy. Pattern interrupt. This isn't about house points or Quidditch cups anymore. The camera pulls back from school corridors to the edge of a war, to a prophecy that mentions only 2 names and yet depends on dozens. Then it snaps back to one boy in a high-backed chair, fists clenched, refusing to be just the boy who lived by accident. This is that story. Not of the chosen one, but of the one who chose himself. And outside Dumbledore's office, in the cold, listening silence of the castle, other choices are already moving toward them. The Department of Mysteries, a second target in the trap. The chamber is open and full of whispers. Not stone this time, but glass. The Hall of Prophecy hums around them, rows and rows of fragile orbs stretching into the dark. Harry's scar is still burning from the vision that dragged him here. Sirius on the floor. Voldemort above him. A voice in Harry's head screaming move. But this is not the boy who ran alone on the night everything changed. Hours earlier, in the firelit common room, Harry had woken with a shout that cut through the grief like a knife. Ron and Hermione stared at him, wide-eyed, already bracing for another nightmare about the Department of Mysteries. Before they could speak, the door opened. Cedric stepped in, hair damp from rain, prefect badge glinting. "You called us on the mirrors," he said quietly. "What happened?" Harry told them. Sirius on his knees. Voldemort's voice, the choking, helpless silence in his own throat. As he spoke, the old war story of the graveyard rose between them, a ghost only two of them had actually seen. "What if it's a trap?" Cedric asked. No accusation, just a hard, steady question. "You said he's used your scar before. We verify before we move." Hermione seized it. "We can check Grimmauld, Phineas's portrait, the mirrors, the order. We do not rush to the ministry on a dream." Harry's fists clenched. "If he's hurting Sirius," Cedric didn't flinch, "then we go. But we go as if we're walking into the graveyard again. Only this time, we don't pretend there's only one target." The choice knifed the room in two, urgency versus strategy. In canon, Harry never had someone his own age trained to question, to plan. Here he'd been sparring with Cedric for months, drilled in scenario work by Sirius and Remus, forced to relive that portkey night until neither of them could lie to themselves about how close they'd come to dying. Umbridge forced their hand. The moment Harry tried to use the flu, the inquisitorial squad pounced, her wand at his throat, her threat to use the Cruciatus. That was the breaking point. The DA moved. Not just 5 frightened Gryffindors and 1 Ravenclaw, but a small unit that had been training for war in hidden classrooms. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Luna, Ginny, and Cedric at their centre, older, steadier, already marked by Voldemort once. In the ministry, the trap still sprang. Death Eaters stepped from the shadows, masks gleaming, spells already flying. But the chaos was different. "Shields front!" Cedric shouted, voice cracking through the echoing air. "Younger years behind the shelves now." They moved on instinct. Cedric and Harry took point, twin arcs of Protego sweeping wide. Hermione and Luna anchored the flanks, Ginny and Ron running interference, Neville guarding their rear. Positions called rotations, dragged to positions called rotations, dragged a stunned DA member behind cover with one hand while firing a stunner with the other. A cutting curse that should have taken Neville's eye hit a shelf instead. A bone-breaking hex meant for Luna splintered stone. Some things refused to change. The prophecy still fell. The Death Eaters still closed in. The Order still arrived in a blaze of desperate light. But now, when Sirius duelled Bellatrix on that thin edge between arrogance and joy, there was another variable in the room. Another survivor of Voldemort. Another target. What if the spell that sent Sirius through the veil never landed? What if Cedric saw the angle, stepped between, took a curse meant for someone else? What if the boy who was supposed to die in a graveyard became the shield that rewrote the end of this battle? Those are the choices waiting in the archway's shadow. And in the next section, we follow exactly where they lead. Who dies now? Trading fates in the Hall of Prophecy. The Hall of Prophecy is chaos, spells ricochet, shelves collapse, glass orbs rain down in glittering arcs that cut through the silence and the screams at the same time. This is the night everything changed, all over again. In canon, this room is a ledger of loss. Sirius laughing as he duels Bellatrix, one reckless step up onto that dais, one red spell catching him square in the chest, a fall through the veil. Gone. Fred nearly dead from a curse in the corridor outside. Arthur already bearing snake wounds from earlier in the year. Tonks and Kingsley cut down, injured in the melee. Neville's nose broken, his wand snapped, his courage hardening in the face of pure terror. Harry staring at the archway in stunned silence, grief so sharp it cut through the grief like a knife. That story is written in blood and shock, and the choice to fight with children who were never meant to be in a war. But what if one of those children isn't a half-trained 15-year-old dragged along by loyalty? What if he's Cedric Diggory, older, drilled for a year and a half by Sirius and Remus, a Hufflepuff captain whose instincts are built around protection and coordination? The spells start flying. In this version, Cedric doesn't chase glory, he counts heads. He's the one barking, "Shields up, pairs of 2, as Death Eaters close in. When Harry bolts after Bellatrix onto the dais, Cedric is already moving, reading angles the way he once read bludgers on a pitch. He sees Bellatrix's wand swing, sees Sirius step in to taunt her, and his body just goes. A shield charm. Too slow, a shove. Fast enough. The red spell meant to take Sirius in the chest slams into Cedric's side as he drives Harry's godfather down behind a stone plinth. Sirius hits the floor, Winded but alive. Cedric staggers, half-twisted, and the force of the curse hurls him off the steps, not through the veil but into a collapsing shelf of prophecies. Glass explodes. He disappears under falling futures. The battle shifts instantly. Remus doesn't freeze in horror at the veil. He roars, a sound that barely sounds human, and drags Sirius back while Kingsley covers them. But there's a cost. With Cedric no longer calling positions, Tonks takes a curse meant for Ginny. She hits the ground hard, leg at a sickening angle, blood pooling. Kingsley, forced to shield 3 at once, catches a slashing spell across his ribs. They still win the field. The order arrives in force. Voldemort appears, the atrium fills with fire and prophecy, and Fudge can't deny what the whole ministry has seen. Yet when the smoke clears, Harry stands between 2 men who should be dead and aren't. Sirius is alive. Cedric is missing. St. Mungo's. White walls, potion-sharp air, the low murmur of healers. Harry and Hermione stand at Cedric's bedside while Remus grips the rails so tightly his knuckles are bloodless. Cedric is pale, motionless, bandaged from collarbone to hip, a faint scorch mark where Bellatrix's spell landed. A healer leans in, voice barely more than a whisper. The damage to his spine is severe. Even if he wakes, he may never fly again. Harry stares at Cedric's motionless hand, at the fingers that once closed around a snitch, and feels a new kind of grief settle in his chest. Not dead. Not whole. Saved and broken in his place. This is that story. The one where Sirius lives, the ministry falls, and Cedric Diggory pays a different price. The question now is simple and brutal. What does a boy who might never fly again do in a war that still isn't over? The answer starts the moment his eyes finally open. Year 6. Reset. A Hogwarts. Already at war. Year 6 begins without innocence. The carriages roll through mist. The castle looms darker, windows burning against a sky that remembers green. The war is no longer rumour. It is headline and obituary. Fudge is out. Scrimgeour is in. And Cedric Diggory is not a tragic past tense anymore. He walks into the Great Hall on a cane, scarred and steady, a living reminder of the night everything changed. Harry feels the stares hit both of them. Not curiosity. Measurement. Which boy will survive the next headline? Which one is already dead in someone's plan? Dumbledore's speech is shorter this year, stripped of whimsy. Voldemort is named out loud. The battle at the Ministry is acknowledged, not buried. There is a moment when he lists the fallen and the injured, when his voice catches on Mr. Diggory, who survived what should have killed him, and the silence in the hall could cut through the grief like a knife. Hufflepuff's table rises first. They clap until their palms sting. Gryffindor follows louder, a roar of relief and defiance. Some Ravenclaws stand, some stay seated, weighing parents' politics against their own conscience. At the Slytherin table, a few students clap once sharply, eyes cold. Others don't move at all, they just stared. This is that story. The one where Hogwarts doesn't pretend to be safe. The DA changes with it. It isn't a whispered rumour anymore, it's an open secret. A semi-tolerated, semi-feared cadre of students who have already seen real spells meant to maim, not just disarm. Formal meetings shrink under new security measures, but the training doesn't stop. It fractures. Cedric runs quiet morning drills with Hufflepuffs and a handful of Ravenclaws, wand movements precise, voice low. Harry and Hermione take evenings, Gryffindors and others pushing desks aside in empty classrooms that remember last year's resistance. What if a secret club becomes a shadow militia before any adult is ready to admit it? Scrimgeour is the first to understand the optics. 2 boys, 2 houses, 2 survivors. He summons them to a cramped ministry office over Christmas, the lion's mane of his hair bristling with barely concealed strategy. Harry refuses him almost word for word, as in canon. Anger sharp and clean. Cedric listens longer. He asks questions about policy, about werewolf legislation, about aura deployment. For a moment, Scrimgeour thinks he's winning. Then Cedric makes his choice. "I'll fight," he says quietly, "but not as your poster." He will not be a spell on a campaign poster while his friends bleed. Back at school, the fracture lines deepen. Slytherins with Death Eater parents stop hiding it. They wear it in their posture, in whispered jokes about when the Dark Lord wins. Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs form a visible block at meals and in corridors, moving in clusters, wands within easy reach. Duels break out over offhand slurs. A single word, mudblood, can turn a staircase into a battlefield. Pattern interrupt. Not a battle. A Tuesday. Homework in the common room, quills scratching, wireless murmuring war updates under the hum of conversation. A second year flinches at thunder because it sounds too much like a curse. Prefects walk patrols in pairs now, DA badges hidden under their robes. Even laughter feels like defiance, short and sharp before it dies. Every corridor, every class, carries the same unspoken question. When the war finally crashes through these walls, who will stand where? The answer is already forming in the way they sit, the way they train, the way they look at Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter and decide what story they want to belong to. Cedric and the Half-Blood Prince. A different kind of rivalry. Slughorn notices them first in the same moment the rest of Hogwarts does. Two boys at the centre of every whisper. One marked by prophecy, one marked by a graveyard that should have left him dead. The new potions master stares over his walrus moustache and sees not students, but trophies. What if the Slug Club isn't just about Harry Potter anymore? He invites them together. The office is warm, crowded, glittering with enchanted lamps. Bottles clink. Photographs wink from the walls. Harry stands near the door, shoulders tight, remembering Sirius's warnings about people who collect him like a rare card. Cedric stands a step closer to Slughorn, posture easy but eyes sharp, already cataloguing every face in the room. Slughorn flatters Harry for his remarkable survival, for the prophecy Dumbledore has not quite managed to keep off the gossip circuits. He flatters Cedric for his Triwizard heroism, for Amos Diggory's ministry connections, for that shining Hufflepuff reputation that cuts through the grief like a knife. Two different stories, one greedy audience. Later, in the quiet of the common room, the Half-Blood Prince's book lands on the table between them with a dull thud. Harry has ink on his fingers, adrenaline in his veins from a perfect Slug Club potion he knows he didn't really brew. The prince did. Those cramped notes, those vicious little improvements. Cedric watches Harry's hands, then the margins, then the way Harry's eyes light up when he talks about a new spell. "This helped you today," Cedric says, voice low, "but you don't know who wrote it, or why." Harry bristles. Power is power, and war is coming. Does it matter where the spell came from if it keeps Ron breathing, if it keeps Hermione from screaming on some future battlefield? Cedric doesn't shout. He doesn't forbid. He proposes a choice. "We test them," he says. "Every new spell, we take it apart. We try it on cushions, on dummies, on stone. If we can't predict what it does, we don't use it on people." Harry remembers Sectum Sempra carving Malfoy open in a bathroom, blood everywhere, silence after the spell. In this timeline, that moment stalls before it ever happens, because Cedric has already insisted they catalogue the most dangerous scripts in the book and lock them behind rules they both swear to. This is that story. In Slughorn's classroom, the rivalry is subtle. Harry reaches for instinct, for sudden flashes of brilliance that win him Felix Felicis. Cedric reaches for method, for shared plans, for the way Hufflepuff trains as a unit on the Quidditch pitch and in the DA. When Slughorn dangles his approval, they feel it pull in different directions. It comes to a head over the memory. Dumbledore has shown Harry the broken thing in the pensive, the night everything changed for Tom Riddle and Horace Slughorn. Canon Harry stumbles, begs, drinks luck. This Harry brings Cedric. "What if we don't wait for a miracle potion?" Cedric asks. "What if we build a reason he can live with?" Together they map Slughorn's fears, his greed, his guilt. They decide who should be in the room, what story they're offering. Not blackmail, but legacy. Harry speaks to prophecy and war. Cedric speaks to students Slughorn failed to protect. The conversation doesn't spiral. It unfolds. And when Slughorn's hand shakes and he gives up the clean, unbroken Horcrux memory months earlier than he should have, something in the timeline snaps. If Dumbledore understands Voldemort's anchors sooner, if the Horcrux hunt accelerates, then the final year cannot unfold the same way. The question is simple. When the war arrives early, who gets to be ready? Horcrux is revealed. Sooner. What changes? What doesn't? The castle is quiet when the truth lands. Not in year 7, in year 6. The memory Harry pours into the pensive is clean, unbroken, and early. Slughorn's confession doesn't arrive at the end of a doomed school year. It crashes into the middle of one already humming with DA drills. Order meetings in Grimmauld Place, and Cedric Diggory refusing to be a silent symbol. This is that story. Dumbledore surfaces from the pensive, slower than usual. Older, his hand, blackened by the ring's curse, trembles against the stone basin. Harry watches, throat tight. Cedric stands just behind him, jaw clenched, eyes flicking from the old man's ruined fingers to the swirling memory. "So, he split his soul," Cedric says, voice rough. "More than once." The word Horcrux hangs in the air like a dead thing. No one breathes. In canon, this revelation comes when the year is almost over, when Dumbledore is already half a ghost in the corridors. Here, what if the night everything changed comes in February? What if there is time, weeks, months, to turn knowledge into strategy instead of pure reaction? It doesn't save Dumbledore's hand. It doesn't undo the curse eating him from the inside. The war has already marked him for death, and he knows it. But now he has space to make a different choice about how he spends what's left. He doesn't just brief Harry, he briefs Harry and Cedric. In his office, with Fawkes staring down at them, Dumbledore lays out a list that cuts through the grief like a knife. The diary Harry destroyed. The ring he himself found. A locket tied to the gaunts and to a seaside cave. A cup that reeks of Hufflepuff's magic. Something of Ravenclaw's. Perhaps Nagini. Perhaps more. Each name is a battlefield. Each object, a promise of pain. Cedric listens the way he played Quidditch. Focused, steady, no wasted motion. "You're telling us," he says slowly, "that if we don't find these, he can't die. At all." "Yes," Dumbledore answers. That is precisely the spell he has woven around himself. From that moment, the resistance shifts. The DA is no longer just a training club, it becomes a shadow regiment. Cedric quietly reorganizes patrols, pairing younger students with older ones, building chains of communication that can survive if Harry disappears. Harry and Hermione start mapping possible Horcrux sites in stolen hours, cross-referencing Tom Riddle's memories with Hermione's research and Cedric's clear-eyed sense of risk. The Order stops chasing rumours of mysterious artifacts and starts hunting specific prey. Grimmauld Place yields real leads as Sirius and Remus tear through Black family records for anything tied to Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw. Fewer wild goose chases, more targeted strikes, less time lost. And Dumbledore, watching Cedric quietly take responsibility no teenager should carry, makes another choice. If Harry falls, if Harry is taken, someone will have to hold the line inside Hogwarts. So when the night on the astronomy tower finally comes, it is not just Harry frozen under the invisibility cloak. Cedric is there too, disillusioned, wand in hand, heart pounding. Dumbledore leans against the battlements, the sky torn open with storm clouds, and stares at both of them. "There is something I must ask of you," he says softly, "and it will cost you everything." The wind screams around the tower. We do not hear the plan. The astronomy tower. 2 boys below, 1 headmaster. Above the tower is not the only battlefield. Below, stone corridors breathe uneasily. Torches spit. Portraits whisper. Cedric Diggory moves through the dim light with his wand drawn, the DA coin hot against his palm. He doesn't know the plan. He only knows the feeling. The way Dumbledore's eyes had weighed him and Harry on that wind-scoured rooftop, the way the headmaster had said, "It will cost you everything," and then not explained. The night everything changed was not the graveyard, Cedric realizes. It's this one. "What if he doesn't come back?" someone had whispered when Dumbledore and Harry left the castle. Cedric had stared at the doors long after they closed, jaw clenched, heartbeat loud in the silence. He makes a choice. The DA is not a secret classroom club anymore. It is patrol routes, passwords, hand signals. Hufflepuffs paired with Ravenclaws, Gryffindors with Slytherins who defected quietly this year, all of them threaded through the castle on rotating watches. Cedric walks the central spine, entrance hall to grand staircase, the artery of the war. The first sign is wrong light, a flicker of green at the edge of his vision where no spell should be. Then a scream, cut off too fast. "Coins!" he snaps. "Now!" Across the castle, pockets burn. Neville near the greenhouses. Ginny outside the room of requirement. A pair of sixth-year Hufflepuffs by the astronomy staircase. This is that story. Not one boy alone in a tower, but a network of students bracing as Death Eaters slip through the walls. Above, on the tower, Dumbledore is already cornered. Draco's wand shakes. The sky presses low and heavy. Harry, frozen under the invisibility cloak, stares at the boy who was given a task he never wanted. Below, Cedric rounds a corner and nearly slams into a masked figure. Stupefy. The spell hits the Death Eater square in the chest, hurling him into a suit of armor. Metal screams. Another mask appears behind him, wand already up, but a red jet from Ginny's wand takes her down. The corridor becomes a blur of curses and shouted names, DA members snapping into practiced formation. Pattern interrupt. In canon, the Order appears out of nowhere to stem the tide. Here, it's teenagers who have drilled shield formations in empty classrooms. A Hufflepuff prefect barking orders. A Ravenclaw calling out countercurses. A Slytherin, pale and shaking, hexing a masked ant. Could Cedric reach the tower in time? That's the question that cuts through the grief like a knife. He tries. Hold this line, he orders, voice hoarse. Push them back from the stairs. I'm going up. He runs. Past shattered glass and fallen portraits. Past a first year curled behind a statue whom he hauls to her feet and shoves towards safety. Every second is a footstep. Every footstep is a choice. On the tower, Snape raises his wand. Harry's world narrows to a single, terrible word. Cedric takes the stairs 3 at a time. He can hear spells above now, hear the wind screaming around the battlements. He is close enough to feel the cold rush of night air. Avada Kedavra. Green light, a body arcing backwards. For one suspended heartbeat, war and gravity agree. Cedric bursts through the doorway into a world already broken. Dumbledore is falling. Harry is still frozen. Snape's face is carved in something Cedric doesn't yet have a word for. He is too late to save the headmaster. But not too late to matter. Because behind him, on the stairs, Death Eaters are retreating and running straight into DA lines that will not break. What if the tower is lost but the corridors are held? What if, in this version of the story, fewer students lie dead on the floor and one captured Death Eater wakes in chains instead of disapparating into the night? The war still turns here, just not in the way Voldemort planned. After Dumbledore, Cedric as the student general. The grounds are still, too still for a school. Dumbledore's white tomb gleams by the lake, and the students stand in uneven rows, black robes rippling in a wind that smells of water and smoke. Someone is sobbing openly. Someone else has gone past tears into that blank, stunned silence that feels worse. Cedric Diggory stares at the coffin and thinks, this is the second time I've watched the war arrive in front of everyone. The Phoenix song fades. McGonagall's voice, crisp but fraying at the edges, dismisses them. Chairs scrape, shoes drag, the whole school moving as if underwater. Above it all hangs one fact that cuts through the grief like a knife. Dumbledore is dead. Snape did it. And Snape is about to be headmaster. In another version of the story, Cedric might have walked away here. He has offers, or recruiters who watched him duel Death Eaters in the corridors, Order members who pulled him aside after the tower and said quietly, "We could use you." What if he took that path, chased the open battlefield, the clean narrative of joining the official war? He doesn't. Standing on the slope above the lake, he watches the younger Hufflepuffs cluster together, first years pressing their faces into second-year shoulders, and he makes a different choice. Hogwarts is the battlefield, he says, almost to himself. Professor Sprout hears him. Her eyes are red, her hands muddy from where she braced herself on the earth during the funeral. "Then we hold it," she answers. That's all. But it's permission. Within days, before the ministry decrees settle and before Snape's appointment is formally announced, Cedric is in McGonagall's office. The room feels wrong without Dumbledore's trinkets whirring, without Fawkes. Maps of the castle are spread across the desk, secret passages, moving staircases, bottlenecks. McGonagall's jaw is tight. "You understand what you're proposing, Mr. Diggory?" "Student patrols that aren't for points," Cedric says. "Evacuation routes to Hogsmeade and the Forest. If they put Death Eaters on staff, they'll go for the Muggle-borns first. We need warning systems, communication that doesn't run through the prefect's badges. He's nearly of age, legal in a matter of weeks, but what he's asking to be is something else entirely. Not a prefect, not a captain, a commander. They work late. Tiny enchanted coins, a refinement of Hermione's DA idea, now tuned to house-based channels and emergency codes. Safe classrooms identified, ward lines tested, alternate exits from every common room marked. Sprout and Flitwick quietly volunteer to anchor defensive spells. Even Slughorn, sweating and evasive, mutters that in a pinch he will brew what they need. Harry watches this from the doorway more than once. Cedric bent over maps. McGonagall arguing in a low, fierce whisper. The war is here in ink and staircase angles. You should come with us, Harry says one night, voice raw. Grimmauld Place, the Horcrux hunt, the insane, half-explained plan that is already pulling him away. You're wasted here. Cedric just stares at him. Who protects them if we both run? His gaze flicks to a group of third years huddled over homework outside the common room, pretending exams still matter. You go break the curse at the root. I'll make sure there's still a school for you to come back to. Harry feels the guilt hit like a spell, leaving Cedric to face Snape, to face whatever Voldemort sends next. But there's gratitude too, sharp and aching. The night everything changed in the graveyard, he thought Cedric would be the one dead on the grass. Now Cedric is volunteering to stand between death and dozens of children. What if the war inside Hogwarts needs its own general? When the Carrows arrive, when Snape takes the chair and the castle itself feels occupied, Cedric Diggory will not just be a survivor or a symbol. He'll be the student general, with evacuation plans memorized, resistance cells already in place, and a school full of scared teenagers waiting for someone to tell them how to fight back. This is that story, and the siege of Hogwarts is about to begin. Deathly Hallows dual fronts, Harry's hunt and Cedric's siege. The castle is quiet the night everything changed, not peaceful, hushed in the way battlefields are hushed, right before the next spell flies. Outside, Harry, Ron and Hermione vanish into the dark with a crack. The Horcrux hunt begins almost exactly as in the story you remember. A wedding shattered, a desperate escape, a tent pitched in lonely forests where the wind screamed through the trees. They argue over clues, over Dumbledore's secrets, over which Horcrux to chase next. They are armed, brilliant, and still frighteningly alone. Pattern interrupt. While the trio disappears into the wilderness, Hogwarts does not fade to a postcard backdrop. It becomes an occupied city. Snape takes the headmaster's chair under the skull-bannered sky. The Carrows stalk the corridors, turning classrooms into torture chambers. First years stare at the dark mark over the gates and learn the new rules. Speak softly, walk quickly, don't attract attention. Detention can mean blood on the flagstones. And Cedric Diggory walks back through the front doors wearing his prefect badge. On paper, he complies. He attends the new Muggle Studies lectures, jaw clenched as Electo spits slurs. He leads Hufflepuff to meals, keeps his voice even in staff meetings, accepts Snape's cold directives with a respectful nod. He cannot be expelled. Not openly. The Ministry has spent 2 years parading him as the boy who survived Voldemort's return and still served the system. Losing him now would raise questions they cannot afford. But under the surface, Cedric is a commander. He meets with Neville in the greenhouses, hands buried in damp earth to muffle their whispers. Ginny passes him coded notes folded into Quidditch play diagrams. Luna sketches strange creatures in the margins of the Quibbler. The shapes are actually maps of safe corridors and carrow-free staircases. What if the DA hadn't just been a club but a full resistance network? Cedric makes that choice real. He organises rotating patrols of older students not to enforce rules but to intercept younger ones before the Carrows do. He designates safe zones, the far corner of the Hufflepuff common room, a forgotten music classroom where no one goes, the stretch of corridor outside the kitchens where the house elves quietly warn them if Death Eaters are near. Curses still fly. Children still scream. But Hogwarts is no longer a pure torture chamber. It's a city under siege with a hidden spine of order and care. And Snape? His position becomes even sharper, more dangerous. He cannot be seen favouring Cedric. So in public his discipline is harsh, even theatrical. He deducts points, gives detentions, lets his silence stretch until students shake. Yet, more than once, Cedric's plans should have failed, and don't. A patrol schedule the Carrows never quite discover. A banned book that somehow remains in the library. A midnight gathering in the room of requirement that goes unreported. Does Snape know? He's too precise not to. He lets Cedric exist as a counterweight, a quiet check on the Carrows' worst impulses, because an utterly broken school would be useless in the coming war. So while Harry breaks into the Ministry under Polyjuice, Cedric breaks the Carrows' timetable. While the trio flees from Godric's Hollow and Malfoy Manor, Cedric is smuggling first years into hidden dormitories, wiping blood from the floor, and planning for the day the war comes crashing through the gates. This is that story. Two fronts. One dead man walking in the Forbidden Forest, one dead man walking the corridors of Hogwarts, both refusing to stay dead. And when word finally reaches the castle that Harry Potter is hunting Horcruxes, Cedric's siege turns into something else. Preparation. Neville and Cedric, two unexpected lions in badger and lion skin. It starts in the shadows of a burned tapestry. The room of requirement has become a war room. Its walls hung with hand-drawn maps of corridors, patrol routes, secret passages half remembered from older brothers. Neville stands over the table, jaw tight, wand tapping a nervous rhythm. Cedric stands beside him, arms folded, eyes on the plan, and not on the way Neville's hand shakes. "What if they cut off the West Stair again?" Neville asks. Last time you improvised," Cedric answers quietly. "This time, we prepare." His finger traces 3 escape paths, one to the kitchens, one to the boathouse, one straight through the Carrows' favourite ambush point with decoy spells layered over it. Calm. Precise. He talks Neville through each choice until the shaking stops. In canon, Neville had to become a leader because everyone else was gone or broken. Here, he has something new. An older student who has already stared down Voldemort, already walked through the night, everything changed in that graveyard, and came back breathing. Cedric has seen war. He recognizes the same raw, furious courage in Neville that he once saw in Harry. So he does something Dumbledore never did for Harry. He mentors on purpose. He sends Neville to negotiate with the Ravenclaws about safe passage to their tower, but walks with him the first time, silent backup at his shoulder. He hands Neville the list of first years begging to join and says, "You assign them. You're better at reading who's ready." When a third year freezes during a shield charm drill, it's Neville who steps in front of the hex, wand flashing, heart screaming in his chest, because Cedric deliberately stood 2 paces back and let him. Every success cuts through the grief like a knife. Every failure is dissected, not to wound, but to sharpen. "You're allowed to be angry," Cedric tells him one night, when news of another accident at the Ministry reaches them and the room falls into brittle silence. "Just don't let them steer your anger for you. We pick our targets. We pick our timing." Neville thinks of his parents, of Bellatrix's laugh, of the Carrows forcing first years to practice Cruciatus on spiders. His anger is a living thing. Cedric's strategy gives it bones. Together they become something Hogwarts has almost never seen. A Hufflepuff and a Gryffindor co-leading, their names whispered with the same weight in every common room. Younger students stare at them during DA meetings, seeing not houses but a pattern, loyalty and bravery standing shoulder to shoulder. The DA had once been Harry's secret class. Now it's a school-wide resistance, the story every frightened child tells themselves before sleep. We are not alone. "What if this is bigger than Hogwarts?" a second-year Slytherin asks one night, voice trembling. "It already is," Neville says, and realizes Cedric hasn't answered first. Cedric is watching him, approving, as if ticking off another invisible box. The night it all fractures, the room has conjured stone pillars for cover and a practice balcony. They're mid-drill when the door shudders. One slam, then another. The magic of the room screams in protest. "The Carrows!" someone gasps. Cedric is already moving. "Everyone under 5th year, you go with Neville," he orders, voice cutting through the panic. "Through the tunnel to the Hog's Head, now." The door glows red, cracks spiderwebbing from the handle. Neville hesitates. "Cedric!" Cedric steps forward, wand raised, placing himself between the exploding doorway and the cluster of students. His shoulders are steady. His choice is already made. Run! he says, just as the door blows inward in a shower of splinters and spellfire, and then the Carrows step through. The spark, before the storm, Cedric's capture or close call. Spell light turns the room of requirement into a battlefield. The first curse from Amicus Carrow hits the shield Cedric throws up without thinking. It splashes green across the invisible barrier, so close the air itself seems to scream. Splinters hang in the smoky air. Younger students stare, frozen between fight and flight. "Move!" Cedric shouts, voice raw. Another spell hammers his shield. "Tunnel, now!" Neville drags a first year toward the passage to the Hog's Head. Luna is already there, her wand tracing silent protections at the entrance, eyes wide but steady. This is the night everything changed for Dumbledore's army. The ambush that proves the Carrows aren't guessing anymore. They know. What if Cedric Diggory's choice here decides who lives long enough to see the war's end? He plants his feet. Hufflepuff Quidditch captain turned frontline duelist, holding the line while bodies shove past behind him. Spells crisscross in front of him in a deadly lattice. Stunners, cutting curses. A flash of purple that makes his skin crawl. He answers with precision. A silent Expelliarmus that rips Electo's wand from her hand. A blazing Protego that swallows a Cruciatus meant for a second year. A wordless blasting curse that sends desks tumbling into a barricade. For a moment, it works. Then Amicus stops playing. Crucio, Cedric dodges, barely. The curse scorches past his shoulder and slams into Michael Corner, who had turned back to help. Michael's scream cuts through the grief like a knife. Cedric's focus fractures. That half second is all it takes. Amicus's next spell isn't shouted, it's hissed. A thin, vicious streak of red. It punches through Cedric's shield and into his chest. He flies backward into stone, breath ripped from his lungs, wand spinning away. The room tilts. Sound narrows to a ringing silence. Cedric tries to move and can't. Something is very wrong. Heat blooms under his ribs, then cold. Boots crunch over broken wood. Amicus looms, wand lowered, eyes glittering with the pleasure of a lesson about to be taught. "Thought you were a hero, did you, Diggory?" he sneers. "The Ministry's pretty little poster boy?" Neville turns. He sees Cedric on the floor, blood on his robes, eyes glassy but still conscious. The sight hits harder than any spell. If Cedric falls, what happens to everyone who believed the story, that he couldn't be killed? Neville's choice crystallizes. He steps back into the fight. Stupefy! His spell slams into Amicus from the side, buying seconds. Luna drags Michael through the tunnel, tears on her face, jaw set. Seamus hauls Cedric's limp weight toward the exit, swearing under his breath. Those seconds are enough. They don't win, but they escape. Hours later, Cedric lies in a hidden alcove off the 7th floor corridor, chest bound in shimmering bandages that pulse with St. Mungo's grade magic smuggled in by Aberforth. Madame Pomfrey's hands shake as she works. The spell tore through muscle, missed his heart by inches, left his magic flickering. "He's alive," she whispers, more defiant statement than comfort. But he won't be dueling for weeks, maybe longer. Around them, the DA gathers in a ragged circle. Some stare at Cedric's pale face in terrified silence. Others shake with rage. A Gryffindor mutters that they should have stayed and finished the Carrows. A Hufflepuff snaps back that then Cedric would be dead. Neville doesn't argue. He just feels the weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than the sword he once pulled from a hat in a different what if. If Cedric can't stand at the front, someone has to. In the shadows beyond the door, Snape watches for exactly 10 seconds. He has already ordered the Carrows to keep Diggory alive. He is useful, his voice cold enough to hide the calculation beneath. Too valuable a symbol to break completely. Too important to let die in a corridor. He turns away before anyone sees him, cloak snapping behind him, face carved from stone. But the choice is made, punishment, not execution. Pain, but not obliteration. Another quiet fracture line in the story of where his loyalties truly lie. So when the final call to arms comes, what will Cedric be? A legend on the mend, or a broken symbol propped up for morale? And if he does manage to stand in that last battle, whose fate will his first spell rewrite? The Battle of Hogwarts begins. A different roll call. The castle is already waking for war when Harry steps through the Hog's Head passage. Not chaos, not yet. A controlled storm. The night everything changed. Word has raced ahead of him through coins and whispers. The DA is moving. Portraits are running from frame to frame, screaming warnings. And in the great hall, under the floating candles and the low, strangled silence, Cedric Diggory is not a memory. He is standing on the staff dais beside McGonagall, wand drawn, jaw set. This is that story. Harry barely has time to stare. Cedric catches his eye, the old Triwizard recognition sparking for a heartbeat. Then he turns back to the gathered students, voice cutting through the grief like a knife. Hufflepuff prefects to me, now. McGonagall is dispatching teachers, Flitwick and Sprout already arguing over choke points and wards, but Cedric slides into the space between staff and students with the ease of a Quidditch captain walking onto the pitch. He doesn't wait to be told. That was his choice years ago, in a graveyard where he refused to stay dead. Younger years first, he orders, eyes sweeping yellow and black robes. First through fourth years, you're not failures for leaving. You're the reason we're fighting at all. Badgers protect the burrow. A few Hufflepuffs flinch at the word protect. More straighten. He pulls out a battered parchment map of the castle, inked with DA notes and secret routes he and Hermione carved out over stolen afternoons. Ernie, Hannah, you're leading the main line to the room of requirement. The Grey Lady will guide you past the blocked staircases. Fat Friar, take the dungeon's route. There's a hidden door behind the third suit of armour. Tell the portraits to keep the frames clear and moving. The ghosts pivot, suddenly part of a living chain. Portrait knights salute. A witch in a ruff vanishes from her frame, reappears 3 canvases down, shouting directions. What if Hogwarts itself became their ally because someone thought to ask? Some of the older Hufflepuffs hesitate. They were ready in another story to slip away, to believe the war belonged to Gryffindor bravery and Slytherin betrayal. But Cedric is not leaving. His wand is steady, his shoulders are squared. The boy who walked out of Voldemort's graveyard alive is staying. So they stay. Harry feels it in the room. The shift. Hufflepuff doesn't bleed away into the night. It thickens the ranks. Yellow and black move to stand beside red and blue, and for a second, the houses are not caricatures in a song. They are an army. Minutes later, the defensive lines are drawn. Neville takes the central courtyard, DA veterans flanking him, his voice hoarse but unshaking as he assigns positions. Cedric claims the eastern approach, a narrow corridor that opens toward the greenhouses and the sloping lawns beyond. Stone, glass, open ground. A Quidditch player's dream of sightlines and angles, if the bludgers were killing curses. He runs the route in his head the way he used to run plays. Here, a shield wall. There, a crossfire. He stations Hufflepuffs with solid, reliable shields at the front, Ravenclaws to layer curses from behind, a pair of Gryffindors ready to charge if the line buckles. Death Eaters will want cover, he mutters to Harry and Neville, tracing the air. They'll use the dips in the lawn, the greenhouse shadows. They'll apparate short, not long. Less chance to be intercepted. We make them come through the bottlenecks. We control the war. It's clinical. It's terrifying. It's necessary. And then the first impact shudders through the wards. The distant boom of spells slamming into ancient magic rattles dust from the ceiling. Students flinch. Someone screams. Cedric steps to the shattered window slit, peers into the darkness beyond the grounds, catches the light at a familiar angle. His silver mask gleams in the wand light. For a heartbeat, they're just shapes. Then one turns, and the silver mask catches the light at a familiar angle. His breath stops. A gesture he knows. A way of standing he's watched at ministry galas, across polite dinner tables, in photographs his father kept in a locked drawer. "Diggory," Harry says quietly. "Who is that?" Cedric doesn't answer. His grip on his wand tightens until his knuckles go white, because in the front rank of the attackers, raising a wand toward Hogwarts, stands a masked Death Eater whose presence rewrites the battle for him in an instant. Someone tied to his blood. He lifts his wand, heart pounding, and realizes this next spell won't just decide a corridor. It might decide which side of the war his own family dies on. Saving lives in the crossfire. Who Cedric pulls back from the brink. The curse leaves Cedric's wand in a streak of white gold, colliding with the Death Eater's shield in a crack that rattles the stone. The Battle of Hogwarts has begun, and this is that story where one boy who didn't die in a graveyard refuses to let others fall around him. Canon gives us a roll call of the dead. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Colin Creevey, Snape on the floor of the Shrieking Shack, unnamed students and fighters scattered through the dark. In this war, the castle becomes a maze of almosts and could-have-beens. So what if Cedric is another variable stalking those same corridors, cutting across those same fault lines? He's assigned to the courtyard, flanking the stretch of corridor where Fred will die in the original timeline. Rubble, smoke, the air tastes of dust and metal. Percy and Fred duel shoulder to shoulder, wands a blur. Cedric is 3 paces back, eyes flicking between spells and stone. Pattern interrupt. Not a spell. A sound. A groan from the wall above them. A hairline crack racing through the archway as another curse detonates nearby. Cedric spent years reading the pitch in a storm, the way wind shifts before lightning. He reads the castle the same way now. He sees the fracture before anyone else. "Fred, down!" he screams. Fred turns, confused. Percy doesn't. The wall starts to go. Cedric doesn't think. He sprints, slams into Fred with his shoulder, drives them both across the flagstones. Stone explodes where Fred was standing a heartbeat before. The shockwave hurls Percy into a column. His glasses shatter, his shout swallowed by the roar. A cutting curse meant for Fred catches Cedric across the ribs as they hit the ground. Fire. Wet heat. He tastes blood. But when the dust clears, Fred is staring at him. Alive. Freckles stark against ash. "You... Diggory..." Fred's voice breaks. For once, there's no joke. In the Great Hall later, that choice will cut through the grief like a knife. Molly Weasley's hands will shake as she cups Cedric's face, torn between fussing over his bandages and clutching Fred so hard he can barely breathe. George will look at Fred, then Cedric, then the ruined stretch of wall, and there will be a silence where a twin-shaped grave should have been. But war is never that clean. Saving Fred means Cedric isn't in another corridor when a pack of Death Eaters sweeps through, where Tonks and Lupin in canon die back to back. In this version, Tonks duels alone for a handful of seconds too long. A stray curse hits her leg, sending her crashing behind a toppled suit of armour. Lupin survives to drag her clear, but a group of younger students, one of them a terrified second-year Hufflepuff, takes the brunt of the next volley instead. Cedric will hear about it after, when names are counted. He will stare at his hands and wonder which life the universe tallied against Fred's. The vignettes stack up. In a side corridor, Cedric yanks Colin Creevey behind a fallen tapestry, shield charm flaring as green light sears past. In the courtyard again, he plants himself between a retreating group of DA members and a charging werewolf, barking orders, spells hammering from his wand in rapid succession. Harry sees one of those moments through the chaos. Cedric dragging a bleeding aura behind cover, jaw set, eyes blazing with the same stubborn refusal that once made him share a Triwizard Cup. It hits Harry then. This is the night everything changed in a different direction. What if the boy who was supposed to be a tragic headline is now the one rewriting who walks out of this castle alive? And somewhere above them, the cracks in the castle's fate are only just beginning to spread. Face to face with Voldemort. Does Cedric stand in the forest? The castle shakes. Dust drifts from the rafters. Somewhere a giant screams and stone answers. And in the middle of that chaos, Harry makes his choice. He knows the prophecy. He has lived with the words grinding against his bones for years. Neither can live while the other survives. In this war, there is no clever workaround, no extra champion to hand the burden to. The Horcrux in his chest is a ticking spell, and the only way to stop it is to walk into the Forbidden Forest and let Voldemort kill him. Cedric cannot change that. Cedric surviving the graveyard rewrote politics, morale, the shape of the resistance, but it did not rewrite the core magic of the story. This is that story, the one where even in an AU full of love and training and second chances, some threads of fate refuse to snap. Harry feels it first as a pull, a cold certainty under his ribs. He is standing in a corridor lit by burning tapestries when it hits him. This is the night everything changed, again. Around him, students sprint past, spells flashing. Hermione is somewhere organising evacuation routes. Sirius and Remus are holding choke points. And Cedric Diggory is at the main doors, dueling 3 Death Eaters at once, wand arm shaking, refusing to yield an inch of Hogwarts. Does Harry tell him? That's the question. In one version, he doesn't. He slips through the melee invisibility cloak over his shoulders, the resurrection stone a weight in his hand, and Cedric only feels a shiver of absence as Harry passes. He turns, stares at empty air, and something in him knows. But the spells keep coming. There is no time. In another version, Harry stops, just for a heartbeat. Cedric has just disarmed a masked witch. Her wand clatters across the flagstones. Harry pulls off the cloak. For a second, there is silence between blasts of green and red. "Harry, where are you going?" Cedric's voice is raw, threaded with smoke and grief. Harry doesn't explain Horcruxes. He doesn't say, "I'm dead already," or "I'm going to let him kill me." He only says the one thing that will cut through the grief like a knife. "Thank you," he tells Cedric, "for believing me, for staying." His hand catches Cedric's forearm, a brief, bruising clasp. Then he lets go. Cedric could follow. He could demand answers, drag Harry back, try to stand in that forest clearing at his side. But this is the one place he cannot go. What if Cedric tried to take that curse instead? It would fail. The Horcrux wouldn't break. Harry would live, the war would stretch on, and Cedric's death would be meaningless. So in the version that matters, Cedric reads Harry's eyes and makes his own choice. He stays. He turns back toward the doors, toward the screams and the smoke, and holds the line because someone has to believe Harry will do what only he can do. Does knowing Cedric is still fighting for Hogwarts make Harry's walk into the forest less lonely? Or does it press more weight onto every step he takes between the trees? And when Voldemort raises his wand, whose faces stand behind Harry in that final, terrible silence? The final stand in the Great Hall. 2 survivors, 1 surrender. Harry hits the stone floor of the Great Hall hard enough that his teeth rattle. He was dead. They all saw him carried in, limp in Hagrid's arms, the night everything changed. Now he's on his feet. Voldemort's scream tears through the stunned silence as Harry shrugs off the invisibility cloak and steps forward, chest heaving, dirt and blood smeared across his face. Wands jerk toward him. Death Eaters stare. Students gasp. McGonagall's hand flies to her mouth, and in the ragged line of defenders, Cedric Diggory almost drops his wand. He had watched Hagrid stagger through the doors, had seen Harry's body, slack and still, the boy who dragged him out of a graveyard and into a war. Something in Cedric had cracked then. Grief and rage and guilt fused into a single, burning point. He'd moved in front of a cluster of terrified first years, every spell he knew balanced on the edge of his tongue, because if Harry was gone, someone had to stand. Now Harry is here, breathing, talking. Voldemort, Harry says, voice rough but steady, has never understood it. Why people die for each other. Why they stand when they're afraid. His eyes never leave the snake-like face across the hall, but Cedric can see the tremor in his hand. Snape did. He was Dumbledore's man, right until the end. The words cut through the grief like a knife. Heads turned toward the fallen body near the staff table. Snape, dead, blood black on his collar. For a heartbeat, the story everyone thought they knew wavers. Voldemort laughs, high and brittle. You dare speak of loyalty, boy? Of war? You are alone. Cedric steps forward until he's level with McGonagall and Kingsley, robes scorched, one sleeve torn, a shallow cut seeping along his jaw. He's not, Cedric calls, voice hoarse but carrying. He never was. The hall shifts. Hufflepuff straighten. Ravenclaws edge closer. Even some Slytherins stare at Cedric with something like awe. What if the boy who was supposed to die first in that graveyard is the one still standing now, wand raised beside Harry Potter? Spells explode. The final duel crashes into being. Harry and Voldemort circle, green and red light locked between them. Around them, chaos. Benches overturned, suits of armor shattered, curses ricocheting off hastily raised shields. Cedric doesn't watch the beam of light. He watches the people. A small Hufflepuff girl frozen near the aisle. He dives, dragging her behind an overturned table as a jet of purple fire scorches the flagstones where she stood. A stunned Death Eater twitches nearby. Cedric's binding spell snaps tight around wrists and ankles before he's even finished rolling. He moves on instinct, shielding younger students, shouting directions. stunning a masked man who's aiming at Neville's unprotected back. In that moment, he is everything Hogwarts raised him to be: prefect, captain, bridge between houses and battles and years. The Triwizard Golden Boy who walked out of a maze and into a war and refused to let that be the end of his story. When Voldemort falls, when the Elder Wand arcs through the air and the killing curse rebounds, and that thin, inhuman body hits the floor with a final, sickening thud, the hall doesn't cheer. It exhales. The silence that follows is worse than the screams. Harry sways, surrounded in an instant. Sirius, Remus, Hermione, Ron, but Cedric doesn't move toward them. Not yet. He turns in a slow circle, wand still raised, eyes cataloguing. Who's still standing? Who isn't? Bodies. Smoke. Snape's blank eyes. Fred's unmoving form. A fallen Hufflepuff boy Cedric trained in the DA. A Slytherin girl who chose to stay and fight. This is that story. The one where victory comes, but at a cost that hasn't been counted. Cedric swallows, throat raw, because the war is over, they say. So why does he feel that the hardest choice is still ahead, waiting in the ruins of the dawn? Who lives? Who dies? Who tells the story? He finds out in fragments, not a single roll call, not one clean list of the dead. Names drift towards Cedric over days, weeks, each one another spell that hits too late to block. In this war, who lives and who dies turns on inches and seconds, and one person stepping left instead of right. In this story, Fred Weasley lives. The wall that crushed him in another timeline explodes a heartbeat earlier because Cedric is there, driving a shield through the chaos, screaming for everyone to get down. Rubble misses Fred by inches, but fate does not walk away empty-handed. Percy doesn't make it out of the corridor. He dies with his wand up, defending the same joke-shop brother he once disowned. Tonks still falls in the Battle of Hogwarts. Remus doesn't. Cedric is the one who reaches Remus before the last charge, fingers biting into the older man's arm, staring him down. Your son needs a father more than this war needs one more hero on the front line. It is a choice Remus will hate and bless him for in equal measure. He stays back, guarding the Great Hall, and survives to hold a shaking Teddy while Andromeda sobs over her daughter's body. Mad-Eye dies earlier than in canon. Cut down during a raid Cedric leads when they push too hard, too fast. A Hufflepuff 7th year from the DA is dead on the 3rd floor staircase. A Slytherin boy who defected at Christmas never comes back from the astronomy tower. Cedric counts them all. He knows with a cold, precise clarity that he was supposed to be a name on someone else's list years ago. The graveyard won't leave him. The night everything changed. He was meant to be a body on the grass, another tragic accident for the Ministry to spin. Instead, he walked out alive, carrying proof of Voldemort's return and the story bent around that survival. Now he stands in a world where Percy is dead, Tonks is dead, Mad-Eye is dead, and he is still here. Survivor's guilt doesn't whisper. It roars. Why them? Why not him? Why does the boy who was supposed to die keep walking when people who joined the fight later never see the dawn? The Weasleys fold him in as if he's another son, but the warmth cuts through the grief like a knife. Molly's gratitude is tangled with the hollow where Percy should be. George laughs less, stares more. Fred claps Cedric on the back after the battle, then breaks down in the corridor because the wrong twin could have died, and they both know it. Remus watches Cedric with a complicated, exhausted affection. He resents the risk Cedric took that cost Mad-Eye his life, and he owes him everything for the blunt words that kept him from the front line. Tonks' mother thanks Cedric for saving Remus. She never forgives him for the raid that left her daughter dead. He becomes a symbol he never asked to be. The Hufflepuff who stood up and lived. His testimony in the Prophet, his leadership in the DA, his calm presence beside Harry in every hearing and interview. It shifts who tells the story of the war. Harry is still the chosen one. The prophecy doesn't change. But history no longer belongs to Gryffindor alone. Hufflepuff has a face. Ravenclaw has survivors who followed Cedric's tactical drills. Slytherins who defected have a champion who can say, on record, that they fought and died on the right side. What if the stories children grow up on aren't just about reckless courage, but about loyalty that refuses to break? Pattern interrupt. Years later, in a bright defense classroom, first years fidget on hard benches. A memorial window throws coloured light across Cedric's scarred hands as he rests them on the desk. "They'll tell you this war was legend," he says quietly. The room falls into a tight, expectant silence. It wasn't. It was choices. It was fear. It was friends who didn't come home. He looks at their wide eyes and for a moment sees tombstones. "This is that story," Cedric tells them, "and I'm only alive to tell it because someone else didn't get the chance." Cedric's future: aura, teacher, or reluctant politician. He doesn't say it to impress them. He says it because the question has been stalking him for years. If he walked out of the graveyard alive, what does he do with the life that should have been dead? After the war, three paths stare back at Cedric every time he closes his eyes. Aura, teacher, politician. Three different kinds of battlefields, three different kinds of spells, and the same old war against fear and corruption underneath. On the aura track, it feels simple at first. He's good in a fight. He's already watched Voldemort rise, already screamed over bodies in the mud. Beside Harry, Tonks, and a rebuilt aura office led by Kingsley, Cedric could hunt down the last Death Eaters with grim efficiency. Night raids, nocturne alley sweeps, quiet, necessary duels where there are no cheering stands and no golden cup, only a choice between stunning and killing. He would be the one who insists on body cameras in wands, on written protocols for when an aura can fire the first spell. Aura oversight, not as a punishment, but as a promise. But what if the battlefield he can't walk away from is Hogwarts itself? The castle where the night everything changed began with a portkey and ended with a grave. In that story, Cedric comes back as Professor Diggory. Defense against the dark arts maybe, or flying, his whistle cutting through the grief like a knife over the Quidditch pitch. He'd stand where Lupin once stood, wand raised, teaching DA-style shield chains and anti-imperious drills to fourth years who still wake up shaking. He would see the way some students flinch at loud noises, the way others stare too long at empty seats, and he would build a classroom where no one faces the dark alone. He'd run evening defense clubs not for glory but for healing, trauma-informed lessons, paired casting so no one ever stands in front of a curse without someone at their side. Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw in the same circle, learning that survival is a group spell. And then there's the Ministry, the place that called his near-death an accident and Harry's testimony a lie, the place that needs reform more than it needs another famous aura. Cedric's Hufflepuff traits, fairness, loyalty, hard work, turn into weapons here. He could sit on Wizengamot committees rewriting trial procedures so no one rots in Azkaban without a hearing. He could champion protections for Muggleborns, werewolves, and house elves, closing the loopholes that nearly broke Hermione's voice from shouting in those early years. In peacetime, his bond with Harry becomes its own quiet battleground. Harry dives deep into aura work. Cedric splits his time between classrooms and committee rooms. Sometimes they argue about tactics, about mercy, about how much of themselves they're allowed to lose. Sometimes there's a week of silence after a fight, but every time the memory of a graveyard, of shared terror and shared choice, drags them back to the same table. So what if you had to choose? Is Cedric Diggory the aura captain who cleans the badge, the head of Hufflepuff who turns the cellar into the safest refuge in Britain, or the reluctant minister for magic who finally makes the laws match the eulogies? And in your version, who does that choice save, and who does it fail to reach in time? The Hufflepuff legacy: how one's survival rewrites a house's story. Cedric's choice in that graveyard doesn't just split timelines for Harry and Voldemort, it snaps a fault line under an entire house. Before the war, Hufflepuff is the punchline, the house of leftovers. The kids who weren't brave enough for Gryffindor, clever enough for Ravenclaw, or ambitious enough for Slytherin. People say it with a shrug and a smirk in the Great Hall, and the worst part is how many Hufflepuffs stare at their plates and accept it. Then a boy in black and yellow walks out of the night everything changed. He stands in the Great Hall, robes torn, ash smeared across the badger on his chest, and tells the story. Voldemort. The graveyard. The spell that missed him by inches. The Death Eaters who screamed when their masks burned. Harry watches the room, but it's the Hufflepuff table that holds its breath. Because this is that story. The one that rips their house out of the shadows and drags it into the centre of the war. From that night on, the old stereotype doesn't quite fit. People still whisper, still joke, but the words don't land the same. You can't say leftovers when the house you're mocking produced the champion who faced Voldemort twice and came back to testify against the Ministry's lies. You can't dismiss hard work and loyalty when those are the exact traits keeping students alive. And the Sorting Hat feels it. Years later, in that cramped, echoing silence on the stool, more children who taste fear and injustice in the air make a different choice. The hat murmurs Gryffindor, and they think of lion banners and old legends. Then it murmurs Hufflepuff, and they remember Cedric Diggory standing between terrified first years and a pack of masked intruders in their common room corridor, one steady even when his voice shook. What if bravery isn't about glory but about staying when running would be easier? More justice-oriented kids, Muggleborns who've read about ministry corruption, werewolves' children who've watched their parents be treated as dead before their time. They start asking for Hufflepuff. Hogwarts itself shifts around that pressure. In Quidditch, no one snickers at yellow and black anymore. They remember Cedric's team flying like their captain's life depends on every match, because sometimes it does. In prefect meetings, Headmistress McGonagall starts pairing Hufflepuff prefects with Slytherins on patrol, citing Cedric's mediation during the first year of open war as precedent. Student government, the reformed Hogwarts Council, suddenly has Hufflepuff chairs in every major vote, their calm voices carrying weight when tempers flare. Interhouse prejudice doesn't vanish. Slytherin still drags a chain of names behind it: Malfoy, Lestrange, Carrow, and some of its students walk the corridors with that legacy pressing on their shoulders. Gryffindor still holds the old hero narrative: Harry, the chosen one, the boy who lived and lived again. But Hufflepuff's new prestige cuts through the grief like a knife, slicing the story into something more complicated, more honest. The war wasn't won by one house, it was held together by the people who refused to abandon anyone. Pattern interrupt. Different year, different children. A Slytherin third year sneers in the corridor, "Hufflepuff, enjoy fetching everyone's books." The Hufflepuff he's aiming at doesn't flinch. She just turns, jaw tight, and walks him straight to the portrait outside their cellar entrance. Cedric's eyes, painted in careful strokes, still carry that haunted, steady light. "That's our leftover," she says, voice low. "He stood up to Voldemort and the Ministry. Who are you going to stand up to?" The Slytherin has no answer. He stares. The portrait says nothing. The silence is the spell. And somewhere in the castle, the hat prepares for another year, already rewriting the stories it will whisper into waiting ears. Harry with backup. Emotional healing in a world with Cedric. Harry hears about the hat, rewriting stories, and almost laughs. Of course it is. The whole castle has been rewriting him since the night everything changed in that graveyard. But this time he isn't the only name in the whispers. In canon, Harry drowns alone. Year 5 is detention scars and slammed doors, Umbridge's quill cutting through the grief like a knife because no adult will say, "I believe you." The Prophet calls him unstable. Fudge calls him dangerous. His friends try, but none of them saw the robed figures closing in. None of them watched a body fall and thought, for one frozen second, that it was their fault. Here, when the Ministry sneers, it sneers at two boys. When the Prophet prints attention-seeking, it has to squeeze in Diggory next to Potter. And that changes the spell. Because Cedric is not Harry. He's a Hufflepuff prefect, Quidditch captain, the boy even Slytherins grudgingly respected. When he stares down a Daily Prophet reporter and says, "I saw Voldemort rise," the Great Hall listens in a way it never did for a 14-year-old who already carried too many legends. So when year 5 hits, Harry still hurts. He still wakes up, screaming. He still flinches at the word graveyard, but he is not sealed in that pain. There's a Tuesday night in Grimmauld Place, damp and dim, when he snaps at Sirius, at Molly, at everyone, the war and the prophecy pressing on his ribs until he can't breathe. In canon, that fury detonates in Dumbledore's office alone. Here, Cedric is on the stairs. "You're not the only one who was there," Cedric says quietly. Not accusing. Just there. "You're not the only one who walked away." It lands. Harry stares at him, at the faint white line where a cutting curse grazed Cedric's cheek in the graveyard. Two survivors. Two boys who touched the same portkey, heard the same high, cold laugh. What if anger doesn't have to be solitary? What if guilt can be shared, divided, made survivable? The DA becomes proof. Not just Harry's army this time. It's Harry and Cedric at the front of the room of requirement, one demonstrating a shield spell, the other talking about what it feels like when a killing curse misses by inches. The students aren't following a single chosen one, they're following a pair of scarred, stubborn teenagers who refuse to let the story end in that graveyard. After the war, that refusal hardens into ritual. They attend every memorial together. They stand side by side at the names carved into Hogwarts stone, tracing dead classmates' letters with ink-stained fingers. They visit St. Mungo's on quiet Sundays, bringing chocolate frogs and awkward, fierce conversation to the long-term spell damage ward. Out of those visits, out of too many blank stares and trembling hands, comes a choice. A support network for war-affected students. Not Dumbledore's army. Not the Order. Something gentler and, in some ways, braver. Harry still carries the prophecy. He is still the one who had to face Voldemort in the forest. But Cedric's presence rewires what Chosen One means. Heroism stops being a lonely title and becomes a shared practice. A relay, not a crown. Years later, when the Quidditch pitch is rebuilt, they stand at its edge. Evening. Empty stands. The grass is new, too green, pretending no blood ever soaked it. Harry breaks the silence. "Do you ever wish you'd taken the cup alone?" he asks. Cedric's jaw tightens. He looks at the hoops, at the sky, at Harry. He opens his mouth to answer. Cut to black. This is that story. Canon frustrations. AU payoffs. Why this what if feels so satisfying. Cedric's answer hangs there, unspoken, and that silence is its own accusation. Against canon. Against the way his story was supposed to end. Because in the original timeline, there is no choice. No rebuilt pitch. No too green grass pretending. Cedric Diggory is dead on the ground in a graveyard, his death so abrupt and senseless it barely has time to register before the war roars back to life. One flash of green, one body, and then the plot sprints away. Readers felt that. They stared at the page and the grief cut through the grief like a knife. Not only because a good boy died, but because he died for shock value. A Hufflepuff finally placed at the centre of the story, only to be fridged as a prop in Harry's trauma and Fudge's denial. Hufflepuff itself suffers the same fate. Loyal, steady, mocked in the margins. Canon gives them Cedric, then rips him away, and the house spends the rest of the war mostly off-screen. Background colour in a conflict supposedly about everyone. And Harry? He comes back with a dead body, a scar burning, and a truth no one wants. The Ministry smears him. The Prophet calls him unstable. Fudge stands in Dumbledore's office and screams about panic and public order, while the only eyewitness who could back Harry up is already in the ground. This is where this AU stares Canon in the face and says, what if that one piece moved differently? Cedric lives. Not cleanly, not cheaply, but he lives. He staggers back with Harry, curse-burned and shaking, and when they reach the hospital wing, he is not a corpse to be explained away, but a prefect, a Quidditch captain, a Hufflepuff champion who can say, in a hoarse voice that carries through the Great Hall, Voldemort is back. I saw him. Suddenly, Fudge's smear campaign hits a wall it cannot easily shatter. 2 boys, 2 houses, 2 wands that remember the same spell. Harry is no longer a lone, traumatized teenager shouting into a political storm. He has a credible ally whose very existence complicates the lie of tragic accident in the maze. Hufflepuff too refuses to stay in the background. Their champion survived the night everything changed. In this story, that survival pulls the whole house into the war. Badgers in yellow and black, sitting in secret meetings, guarding passageways, volunteering for the DA not as comic relief, but as the backbone of a resistance. There is an emotional catharsis in that, in watching a good character survive and then have to live with it. Cedric's arc stretches beyond the graveyard. Survivor's guilt, hard choices, lines he swore he'd never cross. His life becomes meaningful on its own terms, not just as the catalyst for Harry's pain. And yet the AU doesn't pretend death can be erased. Not every loss is undone, not every name on the memorial wall vanishes. Instead, the story trades one early, senseless death for a richer, more complex tapestry of who falls later and why. Maybe a Hufflepuff first year is pulled out of the line of fire because Cedric is there. Maybe a Weasley survives because the Ministry couldn't stay blind as long. So here's the hook. This section leaves you with, if you could trade one death in canon for Cedric's survival, whose would it be? Fred's? Tonks's? Remus's? What if that single altered choice rewrote the final battle, the Horcrux hunt, the way the war scarred the next generation? This is that story beginning to ask you, very quietly, what one life is worth when the spells start flying. Alternate timelines. Same core. What doesn't change? Even if Cedric lives, so if one life is spared when the spells start flying, what doesn't move? What refuses to bend, no matter how loudly the story screams for mercy? The prophecy doesn't care that Cedric Diggory walks out of the graveyard alive. It is cold, carved magic. A boy born at the end of July, marked as an equal, must still face the Dark Lord. Harry is still a Horcrux. That shard of soul still rides behind his scar, dead weight and living curse. For Voldemort to fall, that piece still has to die. Harry still has to walk into the forest and choose death. This is the part that cuts through the grief like a knife. Cedric can testify, can stand in the Great Hall with his wand shaking as he tells them how Voldemort rose from a cauldron and called his Death Eaters, but he cannot rewrite the mechanics of the war. The killing curse that rebounds in the end? It still has to be Voldemort's own spell. The Elder Wand still has to turn on its master. The story is anchored to that loop. Voldemort kills, Voldemort falls by his own hand. Institutional rot doesn't vanish because one Hufflepuff survives the night everything changed. Cornelius Fudge is still terrified of losing power. The Ministry still buries reports, leans on the Daily Prophet, calls it hysteria. Pure blood supremacy still coils through the Wizengamot, through old money, through families who stared down at Cedric's yellow and black tie and saw lesser. Hogwarts is still vulnerable. A castle with moving staircases and too many secrets. A headmaster who gambles with children and keeps prophecies in dusty rooms. What does change is who pays which price. Cedric's survival doesn't fix everything. It redistributes pain. Maybe Molly Weasley doesn't lose Fred, but Amelia Bones dies a year earlier. Maybe Tonks lives to hold her son and someone else falls on the ramparts instead. Harry isn't the only teenage hero in the room now, so the burden of being believed, of standing up in the face of adult denial, is shared. That sounds merciful. It isn't. It just means the grief spreads in different directions. The themes don't move. Love, sacrifice, choice, the cost of war, they still define everything. What shifts is the lens. With Cedric present, loyalty and quiet endurance stop being background Hufflepuff jokes and become central weapons. What if the most powerful act in this version isn't a Gryffindor's reckless charge, but a Hufflepuff's decision to stay, to testify, to keep showing up in courtrooms and battlefields, even when he is terrified? This is that story, bent toward patience and stubborn hope. Pattern interrupt. Think about another favourite what if. What if Sirius lived? What if he never fell through the veil and Harry had a father's hand on his shoulder in the forest? The emotional colour changes, less orphaned rage, more grounded defiance, but the skeleton stays the same. Horcruxes must be found. Hallows tempt and distract. Voldemort still dies by his own curse. Cedric living works the same way. Different texture, different scars, same war, same prophecy, same final wand raised in the Great Hall. The question isn't whether the end changes, it's who can still stand to watch it happen. And in the next beat, we follow Cedric into that first confrontation with Fudge where survival becomes a weapon. And a sentence. Scene seeds 5 AU moments you could write tonight. So let's drop you straight into the fire. No summaries, no distance. Just 5 doors into this AU. 5 moments you could write tonight if you wanted to know what it really meant when Cedric Diggory didn't die in that graveyard. Door 1, the sprint. Cedric's lungs are burning. His trainers slip on wet grass between toppled gravestones. Harry has just screamed, "Take the cup! Go!" The graveyard explodes in green and red. A killing curse hisses past his ear, close enough that the air itself feels dead for a heartbeat. He doesn't look back. He can't. The cup is ahead, gleaming on the ground, and every step is a choice between courage and cowardice. Fingers close around the handle, a yank behind his navel, then stone under his knees, the roar of the Hogwarts crowd, and Cedric Diggory is back in the light, shaking, alive, staring up at a sky that has no idea the war has already begun. Door 2. The silence. Hospital wing. Night. Curtains half drawn, moonlight in thin strips across white sheets. Cedric lies on his back, eyes open, listening to the slow, ragged breathing in the bed beside him. "You awake?" Harry whispers into the dark. Cedric answers without turning his head. They talk in fragments. The way Voldemort's eyes burned, the feel of ropes biting into Cedric's wrists, the moment Harry's mother stepped out of his wand as a ghost of light. They share the details they refuse to give Fudge, the ones that cut through the grief like a knife. Two boys cataloguing a nightmare, building a shared story the adults will try to deny. Door 3, the room of requirement echoing with shouted spells. Cedric has a whistle between his teeth. A captain again. "Pairs!" he yells. "Hufflepuff with Slytherin now." There are protests, glares, swallowed insults. He doesn't care. This is that story where house lines stop mattering because death doesn't check colours on a tie. He runs drills like Quidditch practice, timed shields, rotating partners, pressure until their wands shake. Then Harry steps forward, eyes hard. "My turn. Patronus work." The room chills. You want to know what if you face Dementors in a real battle? You learn to make light when everything in you screams to give up. Door 4. Hogwarts under siege. The night everything changed again. The room's walls are rough stone, and Cedric and Neville are painting a crude map of the castle with stolen chalk and shaking hands. Corridors, secret passages, bottlenecks. "We put the strongest here," Cedric says, circling the main staircase. Neville shakes his head, jaw set. "No, that's mine." They argue over who gets the worst routes, who takes the highest risk, because in this version there are more leaders than Harry, and more people willing to stand where it's most likely someone ends up dead. Door 5. Years later. No war cries. Just wind. Cedric stands in a quiet cemetery before the grave of a witch he dragged out of the Great Hall rubble, who lived to 83 and died in her sleep. He runs his fingers over the dates. He thinks about the night he should have died, the cup, the spell that missed by inches, the strange math of borrowed time. How many lives did he buy with that one desperate sprint? How many did he fail to save, even with all those extra years? Which door do you walk through first? Pick one, crack it open in the comments, and tell us what happens next. Or throw in your own Cedric survives moment we haven't even touched yet. Power of the second witness, real-world parallels. Here's the thing about Cedric Diggory walking out of that graveyard alive. It doesn't just change Hogwarts, it changes the pattern of the story. In canon, Harry comes back alone, shaking, bleeding, screaming that Voldemort is back while the adults close in around him. One teenage boy against a minister, a headmaster, a school, a press machine. That image isn't fantasy. It mirrors every real-world moment where one survivor, one whistleblower, stands up in front of a polished institution and says, "Something is terribly wrong." And the room responds with polite silence. Or worse, smears. We've seen it. The lone nurse who reports unsafe wards. The student who names an abusive teacher. The analyst who warns about illegal surveillance. One voice can be dismissed as unstable, confused, attention-seeking. The institution smiles, folds its robes around itself and says, "Tragic accident in the maze. Case closed. But what if there are two? What if Harry is not the single, unreliable narrator of the war, but the first witness, and Cedric is the second?" In the real world, that second credible witness is often the moment the spell breaks. Corroboration cut through the grief like a knife. Suddenly it's not just a story, it's a pattern. Details match, timelines line up, the cost of calling them both liars skyrockets. Cedric is that second witness, Hufflepuff prefect, Quidditch captain. The boy even Slytherin's respect for being fair. When he stares down Fudge and says calmly that he saw Voldemort rise, that he watched Death Eaters return, that Harry saved his life, the Ministry can still deny it. But now they have to call both boys unstable, both families hysterical, both houses misled. In the Muggle world, movements rarely ignite because one perfect hero made one perfect speech. They build when multiple diverse voices step forward and say, "Me too, I saw it, I was there." A worker, a manager, a doctor, different roles, same truth. That's what shifts public opinion, what forces newspapers to print follow-ups, what makes politicians hesitate before they swing the axe. Harry and Cedric are that coalition in miniature, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, impulsive war orphan and careful golden boy. Their differences are the point. Their shared testimony, the cup, the graveyard, the dead bodies, the pale snake-faced man, turns a lone, hysterical teenager into the front line of a broader, messier chorus. Does that guarantee justice? Of course not. Institutions dig in. Churches, corporations, ministries, they all have the same reflex: protect the structure, discredit the threat. Even with Cedric alive, Fudge can still cling to his fear. He can still scream about imposters and Confundus charms, but every denial now costs him more reputation, more political capital. In this AU, his position becomes untenable sooner, not because people suddenly grow brave, but because pretending nothing happened requires swallowing 2 boys, 2 houses, 2 families, and half of Hogwarts whole. Pattern interrupt. Step out of the castle for a second. Think of any moment when a second voice changed how you heard the first. A news story. A friend's confession. The way the air in the room shifted when someone else said, "Yes, that happened to me too." Now, snap back to the Great Hall. Cedric's hand is still trembling. Harry's scar is still burning. 2 teenage heroes, 2 living witnesses, standing under the enchanted ceiling, about to tell the wizarding world the truth. This is that story. Your turn. Recasting the war through Cedric's eyes. The Great Hall holds its breath. Cedric's voice is still ringing against the stone. Harry's scar still screaming under the enchanted sky. And every student at every table is staring at them as if the war has just walked through the doors. Now it's your turn to move him. Pick one book: Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, Deathly Hallows. Hold it in your mind like a port key and ask, what if Cedric Diggory walked through every chapter of that story alive? Not as a ghost, not as a name on a memorial, as a boy with ash on his robes and graveyard dirt still under his nails. Start with order. The night everything changed has already happened. The graveyard, the spell, the way Voldemort's rebirth cut through the grief like a knife. Where is Cedric when Harry is dragged to Dumbledore's office? Is he in the hospital wing, shaking, trying to describe the exact sound of the spell that almost killed him? Is he standing beside Harry when Fudge arrives, watching the minister's denial harden into policy? Follow him into the smaller, quieter rooms, into the library where he's hunched over a pile of books on necromancy and forbidden curses, tracing diagrams of skeletal hands with fingers that still remember the feel of cold stone tombs. Into a Hufflepuff dormitory where he can't sleep, where the silence is too loud, where he keeps replaying the moment he chose to grab the cup instead of Harry's arm. Or, jump ahead. Half-Blood Prince. When Harry is shouting about Draco in a corridor, where is Cedric? Is he the one who steps between them, prefect badge catching the torchlight, voice low but unshakable because he's already stared Voldemort in the face? Does he patrol the castle with Tonks on dark nights, trading stories about fear and choice and how young you can be and still feel dead tired inside? In Deathly Hallows, when the Carrows stalk the corridors, picture Cedric as the older student who notices the first year, who flinches at every shouted spell. Does he walk them back to their house, wand in hand, promising they won't be alone? Does he help Neville carve the first secret message into the room of requirement wall, his handwriting steady where his heart is not? Now make it sharper. Whose fate does he change? Fred, laughing until the end. Sirius, falling through the veil. Tonks and Remus, dead on the same cold floor. Colin, too small under too much rubble. If Cedric is in that battle, whose death does he throw himself in front of? And why does that trade feel right to you, or unbearably wrong? You don't need a full fic, just one scene, one page, one sketch. Cedric at Grimmauld Place, listening to Moody. Cedric on the Astronomy Tower, one shaking. Cedric in the Great Hall, after. Ask yourself, what if you wrote the first line of his new life? If Cedric Diggory walked out of that graveyard alive, what's the very first sentence of the story you'd give him? Hold it in your head. Hear it, because next we're going to ask what that first line would cost. Wrapping the timeline from Graveyard Flash to Rebuilt World, because next we're going to ask what that first line would cost. Here's the answer. Everything. Not just for Cedric, but for the war itself. One boy who was supposed to be dead walks out of the night, everything changed, and the whole story tilts. In this timeline, the graveyard doesn't claim him. Harry screams for Cedric to run, a spell misses by inches, and Cedric slams his hand onto the cup. Portkey yank, blinding light, and he's back on the Hogwarts pitch with a curse scar burning across his ribs, and Voldemort's rebirth seared into his memory. This is that story. From there, the divergences stack fast. Cedric doesn't vanish into a coffin and a ministry-approved narrative. He stands in the hospital wing, voice shaking but steady, backing Harry publicly when it matters most. In the Great Hall, he stares down Fudge and a sea of students, tells them how the dead rose and the dark mark burned, and the silence after his words could cut through the grief like a knife. Because of that choice, the smear campaign never hits with the same force. The prophet can paint Harry as unstable, but Cedric Diggory, Hufflepuff prefect, Quidditch captain, the boy everyone's parents trusted, is harder to erase. The ministry's denial frays sooner. The whispers in common rooms are different. What if Harry's not mad? What if they're both telling the truth? Hogwarts shifts around that question. Cedric returns as more than a survivor. He becomes a symbol students can touch. He co-leads the DA with Harry, turning it from a secret Gryffindor rebellion into a cross-house resistance. Hufflepuffs show up in force. Ravenclaws bring strategy. Even some Slytherins drift in at the edges, curious, calculating. The room of requirement fills with yellow and black as often as red and gold. By the time Umbridge carves scars into hands, Cedric is already quietly organising patrols, safe routes, coded messages. When Snape takes the castle and the Carrows arrive, that groundwork becomes a student network that doesn't break. Hufflepuff corridors turn into supply lines. The kitchens become a hub for smuggled potions and passwords. Hogwarts doesn't just endure, it fights back earlier, harder. And in the Battle of Hogwarts, the ripples become bodies that live or die. Cedric, now a reluctant general, pulls first years behind conjured shields, redirects spells, takes hits meant for others. Some casualties shift. A nameless Hufflepuff who died in a corridor duel now survives because Cedric was there. Maybe Fred Weasley falls in a different hallway. Maybe Tonks makes it through the night because Cedric covers her flank when Remus stumbles. His arc bends under the weight of all of this. Golden Boy champion. Traumatized survivor waking up screaming from graveyard dreams. Reluctant general who knows every order might get a friend killed. And, after the war, a man standing in a rebuilt Hogwarts, trying to live with the ghosts of every choice he made and every name on the memorial. This AU doesn't erase pain, it redistributes it. It drags overlooked houses into the spotlight, lets Hufflepuff loyalty and stubbornness shape the war instead of decorating the margins. It asks what happens when the boy who should have been a memory becomes the one wizard the ministry cannot silence. So here's the larger question this timeline is really circling. What do we owe the characters we lost too soon? If we give Cedric Diggory back his life, who else gets pulled out of the grave with him? And who takes their place? Hold that thought, because next we're going to see exactly how far those traded fates can go. If you could trade one death, the ultimate Cedric question. So here's where the wand passes from us to you. We've been tracing one possible path through this war, one version of the night everything changed in that graveyard. But there's a harder, sharper question waiting in the silence between spells, and it cuts through the grief like a knife. If you could trade one canon death for Cedric Diggory's survival, whose would it be, and why? Not just who you miss, not just who you love. Think in terms of story, of consequence, of war. What if the choice you make doesn't just pull one person out of the ground, but sends cracks running through everything we think we know about this timeline? Would you trade Fred Weasley so that a Hufflepuff hero lives and a twin gets to grow old? Imagine Cedric in the Great Hall, alive, staring at the bodies after the battle, realizing that his survival pushed fate toward a different Weasley grave. Would you give back Remus Lupin, leaving Cedric dead in the grass of Little Hangleton because you can't bear a world where Teddy grows up an orphan? Or do you reach further back, Sirius, Dumbledore, even Snape, knowing that each of those choices would rewrite the war from its foundations? Tell me your trade, but go deeper than names. Walk me through the moment. Does your Cedric stand at the Quidditch World Cup years later, hand clenched around his wand as Death Eaters march, knowing he was supposed to be dead? Does he visit Azkaban after the war, staring through the bars at a defeated Death Eater, realizing that one spell in a graveyard turned him into their judge and witness? In this version, you are the one holding the portkey. You decide who touches it. You decide who doesn't come back. Use the comments as your pensive. If you have a scene, a line of dialogue, a single image of Cedric survives that we haven't touched, a DA meeting where he and Harry argue tactics, a moment in the Ministry atrium when the Prophet tries to twist his words and he refuses to break. Put it there. This is that story, but it doesn't have to be the only one. Your mini AUs, your one-shot timelines, your quiet domestic epilogues where Cedric sends his own child onto the Hogwarts Express, they all belong in this conversation. I will be reading them. All of them. The most compelling, the most devastating, the ones that make the war feel new and terrible and necessary again. I may pull those into a future video or a community post to build out an entire web of traded fates. So, make your choice. Tell me who dies so Cedric lives, and what that does to Harry, to Hermione, to the world that crawls out of the rubble. Then, if you want more deep dive what-if timelines, more nights where one decision shatters canon, make sure you're subscribed, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments which character or which single event you want us to rewrite next. One last look at the cup, closing on the image that started it all. So keep that in your mind and then go back one last time to where it all began. The maze is breathing. Hedges loom, black against a starshot sky. The crowd is a distant roar, muffled, as if someone cast a silencing spell over the world itself. At the center of it all, on a small patch of trampled earth, the Triwizard Cup waits. Silver. Still. Glinting under starlight. It hums. Low, insistent. Portkey magic coiled tight. The spell that should have been a death sentence for Cedric Diggory. This is the night everything changed. Not because a Dark Lord rose in a graveyard, but because two boys refused to let the other die alone. Harry is breathing hard, robes torn, wand slick in his hand. Cedric's chest is heaving, eyes wide, trying to track every rustle in the hedge. They stare at the cup. They stare at each other. A choice hangs in the air, heavier than the maze's darkness. Take it alone. Leave the other behind. Win. Survive. Or together. Harry gasps. The word cuts through the grief like a knife, through fear, through the war. Neither of them fully understands yet. Cedric hesitates for one heartbeat. Then he nods. Two hands reach. Not in slow motion. This isn't a prophecy, it's a scramble, a desperate, clumsy grab. Fingers brush cool metal at the same time, skin against cup. They don't know that in this version of the story, that shared touch will twist the spell, will jolt Cedric out of the graveyard with a scar on his shoulder and a memory that will set Hogwarts on fire. They don't know that one extra heartbeat of contact will ripple forward into the DA, into the Order, into a world where Hufflepuff colours stand in the front line of the last battle. They just choose. That's all. Freeze the frame there. Two boys, two hands, one cup, the hum of portkey magic about to tear the night open. Ask yourself, what if Harry had let go? What if Cedric had stepped back? What if that metal had met only one set of fingers and the other boy had fallen dead in the grass? Another name for the Ministry to twist into a lie? Sometimes it isn't the grand prophecy that changes the war. Sometimes it's the smallest divergences, a shouted warning in a graveyard, a missed curse, a hand on a cup, that create entire new worlds of consequence and meaning. Hold that image when you think about this series. Hold it when you think about every other almost in these books. The missed killing curse, the unopened locket, the wand that didn't quite obey. This is that story, and it's also a question. Which moment would you touch, if you could, and send spinning down a different path? So let that cup sit in your mind a little longer. Let the maze close in. Let the starlight burn on the metal. Let the spell hum under your skin. And if you want more of these alternate timeline deep dives, more nights where a single choice overturns canon, stay subscribed, hit the bell, and in the comments tell me which cup, which choice, which almost death you want us to rewrite next.